Chapter 886. Huaisher did not expect that Garland would not give him a blank check this time. Instead, he gave him a huge discount for free. Even Huaisher found it hard to believe. "You're leaving it to me?" "What else?" Garland asked. "I can't let you do alchemy and let an old thing like me, who doesn't even know what a battlefield looks like, command, right? That's not impossible." Anyway, it was not the first time that the great master did not speak human language. Huaisher was already very experienced. He did not give Garland a chance to refute and asked again, "What if I want to contact you?" "Just look for Rachel." After a moment of silence, Garland glanced at the cowering alchemist behind him. "He will contact me. Do you have any other questions?" Huaisher shook his head and turned to leave. However, Rachel, who was left behind, subconsciously chased after him and called out, "Great, great master." Garland turned back and looked at him, but Rachel was stunned in place. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Finally, he lowered his head and asked, "Is there anything else you want me to do?" "No, you're on your own." Garland retracted his gaze indifferently and disappeared. Only Rachel was still stunned on the spot and became dispirited. Soon, he noticed Huaisher's interested gaze. "I feel like there's some kind of deal between you two that I don't know about." Huaisher stroked his chin and asked curiously, "Is it convenient to tell me?" "It's none of your business." Rachel glared at him and wanted to say something, but after seeing the pile of strange things behind Huaisher, he suddenly lost his courage and found a corner to squat down. Huaisher and the friendly giant dog beside him looked at each other and heard a loud roar in the distance. The earth was shaking slightly. Huaisher thought for a moment and returned to the throne of the Sunmaker. He looked up and saw a huge figure walking out of the thick smoke and fire. Giants. The hunched and emaciated figures were so large that when they staggered forward, the entire land of Helios trembled. "No, that's not right. I feel like I've seen him somewhere in the underworld." When the flames dissipated, the incomplete halos hovering above their heads slowly appeared. The naked and skinny giants were wearing collars that pierced their necks. As if they had been tortured, they staggered forward under the pull of countless chains. Blood dripped down. Traces of broken wings could still be seen on their backs. It was as if an angel in the legends had fallen into the hands of a demon. After being tortured, it had fallen into madness. He unconsciously swung his arms, and in the endless nightmare, he opened his mouth and roared, but there was no sound. Only the sound of a true tidal wave spread out. Even from a distance of 1,000 meters, the outer walls of the Twilight Village were faintly shaken. As a follower of the kings of hell, Gala was already used to war. He had personally participated in and commanded countless fierce battles. At this moment, after seeing the bombardment of the Twilight Village, he made a countermeasure without hesitation. On one hand, he dispersed the density of the large group of hell and used the tactic of dispersing the troops to reduce the damage of the artillery. Then, he stirred up the fog to cover the battlefield and conceal his own existence. Soon, in the thick fog, siege weapons appeared. Those gigantic creatures that looked like deformed angels whose wings had been torn apart were still silently singing and praising God with their halos above their heads. Even if their gods had already fallen into hell, even if they themselves had been distorted into crazy monsters, the artillery that fell from the sky fell into the range of the ode of the abyss. It quietly turned into iron powder and fell from the sky. Before it fell to the ground, it rotted into poisonous dust. It was like a copper-green rain. Under the protection of the distorted angels, the large group of hell slowly moved forward, like pieces of wriggling black spots, squeezing closer to the edge of the Twilight Village. Above the eternal frost furnace, the giant eye in the alchemy fire opened again, and the red light spewed out. It swept across in an instant. The long distance was crossed, In an instant, the invisible sound was cut, and there was a strange sound like a bubble bursting. The blazing light beam left deep burn marks on the bodies of 3 or 4 distorted angels and cut off the head of an angel. The head that was like a boulder fell to the ground, but the lips were still opening and closing, singing silently. The body that lost its head was still moving forward. Even after burning the chains, its speed was unbelievably fast. The angel, who had lost control, trampled over its allies and danced wildly. It was now heading straight for the Twilight Village. Countless artillery fire shrouded its body, smashing its huge body into pieces. But its limbs that were riddled with holes still swayed forward. It crashed straight into the high metal wall, shaking the cracks on it one after another. It actually resisted the self-repair of the high wall and forcibly tore open a crack. The stinky blood flowed and fertilized the large group of hell below, giving birth to another round of distortion. A gap was torn open in the defense of the Twilight Village. It was wide open. Huaishur frowned. The giant eye of the eternal frost furnace burned divinity to attack, and the consumption was too large. One shot cost 4 or 5 points, which was enough to buy a limited edition Huaishur. It was not cost-effective to use it to deal with this kind of thing. But now, with Garland's gift pack, it was not like there was no way to restrain it. He raised his head and looked to the side. He pointed to the distorted angel that was rapidly approaching in the distance. That thing, can you catch it alive? The paladin covered in steel knelt on one knee and reported, "It's easy to kill it, but it's difficult to catch it alive. We don't have the tools to deal with that kind of opponent. What if we add this?" Huaishur took out the rope of sorrow and handed it over. The paladin raised both hands and took it, saying firmly, "It will not disappoint you." "Very good." Huaishur nodded. "Then let me see the bravery of Charlemagne's knights." The paladin got up, left a messenger behind, and turned to leave. Soon, a high-pitched horn sound burst out from the tight formation under the eternal frost furnace. Iron light flashed, and countless high-pitched sounds of steel rubbing against each other were heard. Flags were raised high again, but this time it was not the flag of Charlemagne, but the flag of decaying dream that represented the authority of the great master of fate. Without needing Huaishur's instructions, most of the knights had already gone to the high wall to help defend the city. And in front of the huge crack, a line of cavalry covered in heavy armor was ready to go. Their iron hooves stomped on the ground, and sparks burst out. They stared indifferently at the surging black tide in the distance. Hurricanes with ashes flew in from outside the crack, bringing with them ear-piercing screams and cries. He was solemn and silent, as if he was frozen ice. When the paladin named Roland got on his warhorse and pointed to the front, the frozen ice instantly cracked, and a mighty stream of iron rushed out from the crack to the battlefield outside with a roar. Those cold armors reflected the sun in the darkness of the universe and glowed with a bright and solemn brilliance. There was no bellow, not even a single breath spilling out from beneath their armor. In the instant that the banners were raised, the legendary paladins rode their war horses and charged into the battlefield that was shrouded in mist and flames. On the golden and white-bone chariot, Gala looked up slightly and waved his right hand down. Then dozens of chanters behind him picked up the bone flutes and began to play sharp and ear-piercing noises. In the middle of the army, dozens of huge iron cages trembled violently, as if there were some behemoths struggling violently inside. Soon, when the gates were opened, wriggling aberrations crawled out from the cages. Those aberrations with twisted limbs chewed on their watchers, and their sharp bone spurs were soon covered with sweet and fragrant food. Under the urging and edict of the flutes, they quickly raised their heads again from the blood and looked at the knights who were galloping out of the crack. Hissing sounds burst out. The huge aberrations' bodies swelled again and pounced in the direction of the knights. The billowing stench of blood rushed to their faces. In front of Charlemagne's knights, the leading paladin, Roland, lifted the heavy lance beside the saddle indifferently and gripped it tightly. The sound of steel rubbing against each other constantly burst out behind him. The silent knights had already pulled out their weapons, gripped the reins tightly, and sped up. Sparks hung from the iron hooves on the ground, and the roar of galloping became louder and louder. Without any hesitation, they aimed at the aberrations in front of them. The eyes behind the armor did not waver at all. Only the iron light and the black tide were rapidly approaching each other. And the moment they were about to touch, Roland suddenly burst out with a high-pitched roar. It was like thunder. Brilliant golden light circulated around the knights, and in an instant, the speed of the entire iron stream accelerated again. Accompanied by the violent tremors of the earth, there were flames rising from their bodies. The scorching red steel was burning, plowing a dark scorch mark on the earth. The flames burned fiercely and turned into a torrent, spreading to both sides. Only pitch-black body fluids could be seen splashing out like rainwater. The cone-shaped formation brazenly rushed forward, tearing apart the aberrations in front of them with irresistible force, and went against the flow again. The most primitive and violent impact of potential energy brought about the most tragic and direct effect. Wherever it passed, all flesh and blood were smashed into a pulp, as if countless iron hammers had smashed through and torn apart. Under the protection of the brilliant golden light, not a single person was hurt. The artillery fire of the Twilight Village caught up with them at just the right time, covering the front line torn apart by the knights, burying everything in fire and decay. At the forefront, Roland had already rushed into the chanting of the aberrated angels. The inaudible chanting reverberated in the air like a tsunami, but the invisible tsunami was immediately torn apart by the cavalry that broke in. The paladins of Charlemagne, who suddenly spread out to both sides, plowed through the large group of hell like the edge of a blade, destroying all opponents as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The rope of sorrow extended endlessly from between their iron horses, quickly wrapping around the limbs of the aberrated angels, entangling them. The huge monster that staggered forward lowered its head, raised its palm, and slapped the ground. Roland had already drawn his sword and slashed at the monster. In an instant, a dazzling iron light flashed, and then a huge arm fell to the ground in a spurt of blood. After sweeping past the two sides like a tide, the chain instantly contracted, and under the efforts of the knights, it tightened again on the aberrated angel's body. In the roar, the aberrated angel knelt on the ground, trying to prop up its body, but it could not break free from the shackles. Roland opened his mouth and shouted loudly. The two separated cavalry once again converged. After a large circle, they dragged the heavy prey with the chains and returned to the crack in the Village of Dusk. The crack that was slowly closing stopped repairing, and then quickly opened like a door. Under the control of Huaisher, countless heavy steel buildings reversed, and huge grinding wheels rose from them one after another. When Roland hung the chain on it, it spun rapidly, bursting out countless sparks. Under the huge power provided by the eternal frost furnace, the grinding wheels began to shrink rapidly, pulling the struggling, aberrated angel into the interior of the Twilight Village. On that straight path, countless steel reversed, revealing the huge structure under the eternal frost furnace. With the opening of layers of gates, dazzling flames were revealed from the deepest part of the darkness. The molten steel gathered into an ocean, stirring up layers of waves, stinging everyone's eyes. More and more restraints wrapped around the limbs of the aberrated angel, pulling it inch by inch into the boiling molten iron. Only the tragic screams echoed in the ears of the large group of hell, bringing a bone-piercing chill. Such a cruel way of execution. What was the point? On the chariot, Gala was stunned for a moment, looking up at the top of the eternal frost furnace. On the throne of the Sunmaker, Huaishur was also looking at him, smiling, lips opened and closed silently. Across a long distance, he conveyed his praise word by word. "Your monster is very good." At that moment, an even more ear-piercing scream came from the molten iron and spread. It was as if it had been engulfed by endless despair. It was hard to imagine what kind of encounter would make it cry out like that. In the furnace, the angel's halo cracked inch by inch, and its scarred face twitched violently, but it was completely covered by the molten iron that had come to life. The casting began. It was only now that Gala saw the second half of Huaishur's sentence clearly from his mouth. "Unfortunately, it's mine now." Waves suddenly rose in the sea of molten iron, and then the outline of a huge monster climbed out of it. Countless boiling molten iron sprinkled down like a rainstorm, and the monster, cast with the enemy's divinity, spread out its wings that could cover the entire sea of molten iron. It was still the combination of nirvana transformation and biological reconstruction. But this time, it was not using its own origin equipment, but the siege weapons from the enemy. In the blink of an eye, the target was completely disintegrated through the boiling molten iron, and then it was recast with a different posture. The huge mechanical insect that used to occupy the underground domain of the Twilight Village, the mechanical monster cast by the shapeshifter, once again reappeared above Helios. In the hurricane, a steel moth the size of a building flapped its wings and rose into the sky wherever it passed, hovering in the dark clouds, dim light of the Twilight Village. So cool. "Then, let's have another one." Huaishur pointed into the distance and turned back to the paladin. "I want the biggest one." "As you wish." Roland nodded. Chapter 887. At this moment, outside the high walls of the village of Dusk, a fierce battle had begun. The guards on the city wall skillfully operated all kinds of machine guns, squandering the bullets that had just been made from the production line, forming a firing point, and began to shoot freely, with the help of the Master of Metal from the Russian Federation. The equipment of the park guards had once again ushered in a new generation in less than half a day. With the terrifying productivity of the village of Dusk, as long as there was technology, there would be endless output. The Titan III exoskeleton power armor, the representative weapon of the Russian Federation's suppression force, the Vulture anti-armor shotgun that could break through the defense of high-grade ascendants, the Bellowbird GCB for 73 city defense machine gun, even the Swalog II ground-to-ground missiles were continuously produced from the production line like a hen laying eggs. When the huge steel moths rose into the sky, dark clouds quickly shrouded the sky of the village of Dusk. Under the dim light, countless lightning bolts emerged from it, and large groups of creatures with wings on their backs were constantly turned into charcoal and fell from it like a rainstorm. That was the hope of the new era, the weather tool that the Changers were proud of. After ushering in the complete hell, it had become an out-and-out weapon of war. During the War of the Worlds, under the investment of the workshop owner, tens of thousands of iron moths once soared above the Sea of Titans, locking the sky. Soon, as Paladin Charlemagne returned, bathed in blood, another deformed angel was dragged into the molten steel. It screamed and burned, and after being brutally broken down into the tiniest parts by the steel, it flowed on the assembly line, where countless delicate arms began to reprocess it. Finally, on the slowly rising platform, the reborn steel spider raised its slender legs and joined the hunt. The clumsy and huge steel spiders climbed over the city wall. Soon, they fell into the endless black tide outside the city wall. They fought with all their might and brought about terrible casualties. After that, they were heavily injured by the hordes of hell. They disintegrated and were scrapped amidst the sparks and thick smoke. They were dismembered into pieces. However, as the abdominal sac ruptured, countless steel balls the size of a normal person rolled out from within. The round steel balls reflected many confused and deformed faces. Those smooth shells quickly fell apart, and the small spiders that were produced from them began to jump out nimbly. They waved their sharp blade-like legs and began to spread wildly. Hundreds of spiders scattered across the vast battlefield, like a drop of water merging into the ocean, quickly disappearing. However, it didn't take long for one drop of water to turn into two, for the engineering equipment that was used to deal with the wreckage and debris had been rewritten many times and turned into ruthless replicating machines. The nightmarish von Neumann machines hunted, ate, and rapidly extracted all the steel alloys in the smelting furnace, grew, and then began a new cycle of reproduction. It was as if there was no end on the golden and white-boned chariot. Gala held the sickle blade and quietly looked at the scene in the distance. She was no longer anxious and impatient. Instead, she was full of patience. Her eyes did not fall on the spiders and moths. Instead, she focused on the city wall. In the present realm, this kind of weapon is really convenient. A mortal can kill a demigod by pulling the trigger. There is no difference between a noble who has inherited the sacred blood and a poor beggar in front of this weapon. He stroked his chin and praised. Although it is a little hypocritical, the era of the Astronomical Society is really amazing. An era without gods. On the chariot, another passenger side. It sounds really good. It must be very peaceful, right? Oh, maybe. Gala looked back and glanced at the great Greek hero, Hercules, and said indifferently, they don't worship gods, not because they are more civilized and civilized, but because in their era, gods have no power. They worship other things more powerful things. Hercules looked at her, puzzled. Most people worship money, but more people worship power. Businessmen and ambitious people have been around since ancient times. It is not rare. I haven't finished yet. Some of them also worship numbers. They like to write down every number of people's daily food, clothing, housing, and transportation, and then summarize them together. It is called big numbers. It's like a bank account. Even if they want to buy something, they have to look at the big numbers. Without the big numbers, there is no way to live. It's so strange. Are they all mathematicians? Most likely not, and there are even stranger things. Some people worship free of charge. Will it really be free? Those who will charge are more expensive, but they like it. They are immersed in the sense of accomplishment of reaping without sowing, and they are never tired of it. They have no idea that they have been turned into commodities by those who worship numbers. They even know it, but they don't care. Gallo laughed mockingly. There are also many people who worship invisible bills. Every day, they stay in front of an altar called the computer. They always feel that they can buy at a low price. It's simply a fantasy at a story. high price. If you want to They deceive feel people, sad and you happy have to make for the it invisible sound currency more believable that can't be matched at all. I Can they haven't make said money that from people this. worship loans, Maybe paper, there is and leather always cases. a glimmer of joy Gallo in laughed, extreme full of despair, joy, right? That's why I can like there be this such a world bizarre so world? much. It's Hercules always frowned bizarre and crueler shook than his hell, head. and more novel than hell. Every day, there are countless scams that lead people to fall, and they always bring me endless surprises. Once again, he pulled out the sickle and raised it to the front. It's almost time. Let the big guys go up and bring our friends a little surprise. Under the chariot, the herald blew the horn again. In the loud and long sound, in the fog, suddenly a behemoth flapped its wings and rose into the air. Where the huge bat wings passed, the dark clouds dissipated. A strange light bloomed. In the light, the killing intent of the entire battlefield seemed to be diluted. In reverse, anger, pain, and despair were all transformed into an indescribable sweetness and excitement. All the hordes of hell were instantly fanatical. In contrast, all the garrisons on the defense line of the Twilight Village felt a sense of emptiness. It was meaningless. War could only create new wars. Anger would only lead to more evil consequences. Killing was meaningless. Only by stopping the war and embracing each other could they warm the world with love and kindness. Such an unreasonable thought instantly appeared in the area covered by the light, and then rapidly expanded in the soul. It actually made people unable to raise their hostility. Instead, they rushed towards the opponent's sword and opened their arms. Stop the war and embrace peace, even if it was a one-sided peace. Even if they were beaten on the left side of their face, they still had the right side of their face. Let them fight and calm down. As long as the other side felt their sincerity and restraint, they would definitely be able to fill the world with love. The chaos spread rapidly, and the behemoth had already pounced on the iron moth and began a fierce battle with the ruthless steel. In the battle, the ruthless casting behemoth was infected by love and gradually stopped resisting. Hell sequence, 11th. It was the one who wore the crown, second only to the ruler. With the ranking of the Solomon sequence, it was enough to be crowned with the title of Duke, Gusion. Just by existing here, this terrifying spiritual infection brought about an irresistible plague. It was a poison of the soul named peace, love, and understanding. On the throne of the Sunmaker, Huaishur looked up and gradually frowned. Naturally, there were holy knights who pulled out the longbows on their backs and aimed at the shadow in the sky. However, when the bowstrings were pulled, the hostility rose to the maximum, and it seemed to have attracted Gusion's attention. Under the bat wings, the green eyes casually looked over, and in an instant, this overinflated killing intent reversed, making it difficult for them to release the bowstrings. Even if they gritted their teeth and shot with all their might, after the arrow flew into the sky, it soon fell crookedly to the ground. At this moment, Gyujins will seem to have actual power. If the hostility was too pure, it would cause Gusion to interfere. However, if the arrow was not filled with pure killing intent, it would be impossible to break through the halo of kindness that surrounded Gusion. One of the 12 holy knights frowned and grabbed the longbow. Just as he was about to shoot, he saw Huaishe raise his hand. No need. Huaishe rested her chin on her hand and said calmly, "If it likes to spread peace, then let it spread it. Let's see if its kindness and peace can change everything." Just as well, with a sum of divinity in his account, he could finally free himself. At that moment, the dark crack of the ultimate slowly appeared behind Huaishe. Great Si Ming's silhouette was outlined, and he looked at the sky indifferently. He looked at it coldly. Then hatred sprouted. Immeasurable hatred, and hatred emerged from the body of the iron moth, as if the door to hell had suddenly opened. Thousands of years of despair and anger flowed out from it, turning into a sticky and dark torrent that covered the wings of the iron moth. Anger, sadness, pain, hatred. As Huaishe looked up, the darkness that had sprouted from the depths of the soul gushed out, and in an instant it turned into a torrent that rushed into the sky and covered everything. The intense hatred and pain had turned into an ocean, causing Gyujin's huge body to stop for a moment and twitch violently. It was as if it was drowned by the tide. The halo was rapidly shrinking and trembling, and the sound of glass cracking could be heard. It was like a fortress made of sand in front of the tide, collapsing at the first touch. Hypocritical kindness and lie-like love were not worth mentioning in front of this hatred that could turn into matter and exist in the world forever. The dark clouds surged like waves. In the ocean of hatred, the iron moth and Gusion fought fiercely. Blood rain poured down, and with anger and killing intent, it filled the entire battlefield again. When Huaishe raised his finger, the fire of the eternal frost furnace was dyed black by the darkness that flowed out from the ultimate. The light shone, and the kingdom of heaven returned to hell. The war had begun again. Along with anger, pain, and hatred, great Si Ming's miracle was operating on this battlefield. Chapter 888. Looks like their peace isn't going well. Huaishe looked away in disappointment. When Gyujin's body fell from the sky in pieces, a loud bang was heard. Countless gorgeous flowers grew out of the rapidly rotting corpses before they fell to the ground. Countless pure, white iris flower petals scattered in the air. The dense, sweet fragrance set off the blood and wore as if they were in a dream. "It's beautiful." Hercules, who was sharpening his sword, looked up and praised. "It's not bad to have such a beautiful place as a showcase." Great arbiter of fate. Gala nodded in understanding. He was not frustrated or angry because of a momentary setback. To him, such a level of struggle was not even an appetizer. It was just a warm-up. He was like a banquet organizer who was passionate about hosting. As the eternal follower of the withered king before the banquet started, Gala would meticulously inquire about the preferences and taboos of every participant. He would tirelessly prepare everything from chairs, tapestries, lights, music, and utensils. Finally, he would serve the most important dishes. Finally, he tasted death in a carefree manner. After hosting a banquet, he would immediately prepare for the next one. In a place like hell, there was no lack of death. Naturally, there was no lack of success and failure. What was lacking was interesting guests. For example, the existence in front of him, the enemy he had to face. It had been a long time since he had such a pleasant feeling. He was like a child who had opened a treasure box, and he could continuously dig out new toys. This is really interesting. Gala grinned, and his smile was ferocious. He raised his scythe again and ordered, "Since the appetizing soup is not enough to satisfy my appetite, why don't you add a few more dishes?" As he spoke, the earth rumbled. An endless stream of darkness gushed out from the cracks, and the alchemy creatures from Solomon's hell sequence emerged from it. There was a strange old man riding on a huge, mutated crocodile with a ferocious falcon on his shoulder. There was a strange dwarf with a lion head and a human face controlling illusions. There was a headless archer with a green cloak flashing in the shadows. There was a vague silhouette with a toad, a human face, and a cat's head. Her limbs were connected like rings, but she was constantly emitting strange radiation and poisonous fog. There was a beautiful woman who made countless hells excited, and even holy knights could not resist her charm. There was a solidifier with a venomous snake coiled around her, holding a horn and a sword. There was a fleeting phantom holding a flaming jade on top of a giant hellish python. A large number of guild masters produced by Hades' workshop were surging onto the battlefield. In an instant, the stalemate was broken. Under Gala's order, the huge ballista was lifted from the rear of the army and aimed at the outer wall of the Twilight Village. It spewed out an indescribable dark green brilliance. The light rapidly expanded, and in the end, it turned into a torrent in the air, rapidly extending forward. The eternal twilight of the setting sun was torn apart, along with the indestructible outer wall. In the blink of an eye, more than 30 guild masters had completely broken through the outermost layer of defense. In Hades' hand, the essence of calamity from hell was once again displayed in the form of a large swarm. It displayed a shocking power, and after breaking through the outermost layer of defense, it marched straight in. Gala did not hesitate to squander the bargaining chip from his employer. He knocked on the hilt of his sword and urged the army to press forward again. "Come, let me see what other good things you have hidden." He grinned, revealing the gorgeous gold ornaments on his sharp teeth. After so many years, he could no longer wait to fight against great Si Ming from the present realm. His eyes lit up with excitement as he asked, "Where is your group? Where is your limit?" On the throne of Sunmaker, Huaishur was expressionless. He just knocked on the armrest. "Please let us fight, Your Excellency." Roland gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and said with a gloomy expression, "We must make the demons who invaded the sanctum pay the price." "Don't worry," Huaishur said. "Mr. Roland, I have seen the bravery of Charlemagne's knights. Now is not the time for you to show up again. Besides, the inner layer and the eternal frost furnace still need your protection." Roland was stunned. "Are we going to retreat and defend?" "Of course not." Huaishur laughed and pointed at the golden chariot in the enemy's formation. "Look, Mr. Roland, the person on the other side is challenging me," he said. "No matter what, we must let him get what he wants." At that moment, the earth shook violently and roared. The reason for that was because there were burning flames that were flowing through the earth. Burning flames. From the eternal frost furnace that was slowly opening, a terrifying heat gushed out. From the space that looked like a chariot's equipment room, countless huge assembly equipment was burned. The steel arms that could not be retracted in time turned into molten iron and quickly melted, flowing on the ground. A ferocious outline appeared from the flames. Bright arrays appeared on the pitch-black alchemy armor, and under the heavy steel cover, the angry incarnation raised its eyes. Then, in the flames, the silhouettes of countless blades and axes appeared, turning into a storm and whistling forward. The steel ground was torn apart like a thin piece of paper, leaving behind deep slash marks. When the giant bull-like creature raised its head and neighed, a thunderous roar covered everything. The storm of flames, an iron pushed forward. It was as if an ominous comet had descended from the sky, flying close to the ground and crashing into the turbulent battlefield. Under the infusion of divinity and source substance, the activated source substance equipment showed an unprecedented sharpness and terrifying posture, galloping in blood and corpses. Tyrannically, it sprinkled death and destruction. Endless anger spread as it moved forward, spreading on every defender's body, causing the blades in their hands, bullets, and even their eyes to turn fiery red. This anger was planted in the souls of every believer, turning into an inextinguishable flame. The blessings from great Si Ming were bestowed upon everyone. Holy! The park guards and the lizardmen army shouted excitedly, chasing after the burning figure with no regard for their own safety, charging forward again. Looking down from the sky, it was like an inextinguishable flame, suddenly ignited in the darkness. The uncontrollable flame spread rapidly, burning the grayish-black tide, igniting the opponents who overestimated themselves, turning them into firewood. It did not care that the followers behind it were shaken off, nor did it care that the enemy had prepared a trap in front of it. The angry incarnation lowered its eyes, the 6 sharp horns aimed at the pocket formation that was opening towards it, its iron hooves stomping the ground as it charged forward again. The mist and the pocket were torn apart at the same time, blood raining down like a storm, falling to the ground together, with sparks and ashes. With just a single exchange, the lion-headed dwarf and its illusions collapsed together with it. After spitting a mouthful of magma spit in disdain, the angry incarnation raised its eyes again, glancing at the hell serpent not far away, and the group leader riding on the serpent, holding the blazing jade in his hand. On the serpent, the group leader was shocked, pulling the reins, causing the serpent to curl up, quickly retreating to a safe distance. Then, flames rose from the blazing jade, hovering above its head like a cluster of stars. Each flaming star carried a terrifying lethality comparable to that of a missile, and they were aimed at the enemy in the distance. However, the group leader still felt that it was not enough. It was still trying its best to activate its treasures, causing the blazing stars to increase, almost forming an ocean. Then it saw it. From a long distance away, the angry incarnation coldly retracted its gaze and charged in another direction. It ran away. Anger rose from its heart. It could no longer suppress it. The blazing jade aimed at the angry incarnation's back, and over 400 blazing stars were ready to be fired. At that moment, it saw its own hands holding the blazing jade. It did not know when, but it was already covered in wrinkles. It was shocked. Immediately afterwards, the hell snake he was sitting on collapsed with a loud rumble, pierced through by something extremely sharp. Pitch-black, poisonous blood gushed out from its eyes. In the poisonous blood, clusters of pure, white iris flowers bloomed together with countless beautiful flowers, their fragrance spreading. Long before that, countless tiny vines that grew out of the scales had already extended to their master's body. They silently entered the body and grew wantonly. On its decaying face, countless mycelium grew out of its 7 orifices. They sprouted rapidly, taking away its last bit of strength. This body had long since turned into a nest of poison and decay. In its last trance, it seemed to see a pure, white silhouette stepping on the flowers, leaving silently beside it. However, it seemed to have recalled something, and the compassionate, white deer returned. It lowered its head and stared at the twitching face. A slender vine grew out like a nimble little hand. It pulled out the extinguished flame jade from his hand and adorned it on its luxuriant and gorgeous antlers. It looked like a gem embedded on the top of a crown. It was a perfect fit. It looked at Bloody, nodded in satisfaction, and got up to leave. All that was left in the darkness was the rapidly declining swarm lords who stared at the skies in despair, and the hundreds of burning stars that were slowly descending upon them. Flames rose, spreading along with heat waves, illuminating the battlefield in a fleeting moment. It illuminated the flowers and grass on the ground that had bloomed without anyone noticing. The hurricane carried fine seeds and fragrant aroma, spreading to the entire battlefield. I feel like I'm more of a villain than the other side. Huaisha rubbed his chin and suddenly realized something. He asked Roland beside him, "We should be the good guys, right?" Well, the corner of Roland's eyes twitched. He wanted to say something, but stopped, although it was a little inappropriate for Paladin, who represented justice, to do this. However, at the same time, he also knew his duty as a knight, as a tool of war. As long as he could win, it did not matter what means he used. However, this new overlord's methods were a little too ridiculous. Was the organization called the Astronomical Society all like this? Could he not do something in the world of the living? Ahaha, isn't it a little ridiculous? Huaisha scratched his head and coughed awkwardly. It's okay, I'll correct the style. The Astronomical Society is a righteous organization. How can we be the same as the demons in hell? Behind him, the alchemy fire in the eternal frost furnace finally extinguished slowly. The casting was over. In the furnace fire, the sword of virtue disappeared without a trace. Then, the brilliance that represented endless love and hope rose into the sky. A solemn crown of light was on top of its head. The sacred white horse walked on hell. Chapter 889. There was light emerging from the darkness. In a literal sense, this dark battlefield that even the illusory sun couldn't illuminate was pierced by the sharp light that made one's heart palpitate. It was wiped out and lined up from the middle to the two sides, as if an ocean was opened in front of a sage. All the darkness disappeared without a trace. Only the light of virtue shone. But after witnessing such a resplendent light, perhaps no one would doubt its significance anymore, right? Even Paladin Roland, the Paladin, couldn't help but hold his breath, widen his eyes, and focus on the pure light. Pure, clear, and at the same time, full of unparalleled power. Just like the embodiment of virtue, it illuminated all flaws and ugliness, drew the line between good and evil, and became the yardstick to measure all things. After fusing with Huaisha's kindness, the sword of virtue, which had completely turned into an origin equipment, rose to a new level after undergoing a nirvana transformation. It was simpler than expected. It should be said that it originally had such potential. The prince's sword and the white horse were originally part of those beautiful stories. What was completed at this moment was just a combination again. Although it was a little fat, but the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty. At this moment, on the white horse, a distant and fleeting figure appeared. The face that looked like Huaisha raised, wearing a crown of light on its head. The eternal frost furnace operated loudly, and a huge amount of divinity burned vigorously. The pure light gathered into a beam in the phantom's hand, and in front of it, the almost endless tide slashed out. The dark ocean was opened up again, to the two sides, just like dawn. There were no cries of pain, no shouts of fear, only silent annihilation. There was no pain, no despair, and no hesitation. The large groups of hell bathed in the light of nothingness collapsed silently, only fine ashes floating in the wind, quickly disappearing without a trace. Under the great light from dawn, they were completely finished together with the long night. Even if they were only grazed by the edge of the light, the dukes of hell welcomed tragic wounds and marks. Their limbs, wings, and even large areas of skin were quickly disappearing. They couldn't feel any pain, and they couldn't feel any discomfort, as if they had been born with a missing part of their limbs. Purification, regardless of whether it was the hell sequences created by alchemy or the large herds raised by Helios, Once they approached the white horse and stepped into the light where it was, they would feel the purifying power. The weak would be reduced to ashes on the spot, while the strong would be suppressed and gradually worn down. The white horse galloped on the large group of people from paradise who were wielding blades of wrath, and the lizardmen army gathered and followed and guarded the white horse. Once again, they launched a counterattack on the eternal frost furnace. Huaishur closed his eyes and felt the exuberant alchemy fire in the furnace. After replacing the eternal despair, it became the new source of motivation, or rather, the transformation center. Now, the alchemy fire was continuously absorbing the supply of all the land, absorbing the mixed divinity, source, heat, electricity, and even curses and blessings. After integrating them, they were injected into the axis of hell, maintaining the operation of the entire Twilight Village. Although it couldn't be compared to the terrifying output of the former perpetual motion machine, it was still not inferior to the supply that any large alchemy array could bring. At the same time, it also burned vigorously in the furnace of the eternal frost furnace as Huaishur's forging fire. At this moment, the forging furnace on Huaishur's metallized right arm had been unfolded. Through the array on the Sunmaker's throne, it was connected to the eternal frost furnace and even the entire Twilight Village. There was no disharmony or abnormality. As the main control center of the Twilight Village, the eternal frost furnace was a miracle crystallization that exhausted the wisdom and skills of all the forgers, as well as all the treasures and collections of the Twilight Village. At the same time, it was also an unprecedented forging furnace. Through the 13 subcontrol centers and countless arrays throughout the Twilight Village, it could completely control the changes of the Twilight Village. The Sunmaker's throne was proof of this power. As the last forger recognized by the Sunmaker and the young Arbiter of Life, who had cut off the eternal dusk, Huaishur naturally received the recognition of the eternal frost furnace and had the authority to use it. As long as there was a sufficient supply of energy, Huaishur could almost be regarded as a miniature version of the Sunmaker when he sat there and was connected to the eternal frost furnace. Apart from his inferior skills and limited energy supply, he could do everything that the Sunmaker could do. This was the blessing of the eternal frost furnace to its user. It was just like the blessing of the legendary workshop to alchemists, which was even enough to raise one to the level of a great grandmaster. Before he backstabbed Helios, Hades also had considerable authority. Now, even without Helios' support, this former chief could rely on his understanding of Helios to create a large group of hell alchemists of such a terrifying scale. Not to mention that Hades' alchemy attainments were far superior to Huaishur's. Even though Huaishur alchemy had improved again, at best, it could only be used to measure the gap between Hades and a great grandmaster. How far was Hades from becoming a great grandmaster? Moreover, the other party was the Abyss Jester, who had the Pied Piper backing him. No one knew what other trump cards he was hiding. Both sides had been fighting for so long, and Huaishur was almost going all out, but Hades hadn't even shown his face yet. Who knew what the hell that old fox was still brewing? I have to put in more effort, Huaishur softly muttered, his left hand tapping the armrest as he fell into deep thought. With the eternal frost furnace here, he would be free of worries and no longer have to worry about the threat of the eternal beast. As long as he sat on the Sunmaker's throne, it was equivalent to having the entire Twilight Village help him withstand the pressure of the destruction element. The eternal frost furnace, which had once contained countless despair and resentment, could naturally withstand the erosion of the eternal beast. Therefore, he could safely use the sacred mark to transform his source substance equipment. But now he had the tools, materials, and abilities. It could be said that he had everything except for money. After squandering just now, the little divinity he earned from Helios had been completely consumed. As for Great Si Ming's own divinity, Huaishur would never consider it. What a joke! That was his own money. It was not easy to save up a little bit, but it had to be used where it was needed most. Now that he had squandered it, what would happen to the inner circle of Danbois? What would happen to his future advancement? But he couldn't earn it, and he didn't want to use his savings. Now he could only freeload. Hello? Are you there? Huaishur looked at Rachel and motioned for him to contact Garland behind him. I'm a mercenary. Can you give me some divinity? Rachel fell into a long silence. His expression twitched. He didn't know if he was waiting for a reply from the other side, or if he had never seen such a strange freeloading method. But soon, a brilliant stream of light flew out from Garland's silent tower and went straight into the eternal frost furnace, causing the flames of the alchemy fire to rise and expand by several times in an instant. It wasn't the tiny amount that Huaishur had expected. Instead, he had directly taken out half of his inventory and tossed it over to her. With such a large amount, if he planned carefully, he would even be able to create 4 or 5 divine stigmata above level 4. Huaishur widened his eyes in surprise and clapped his hands. Thank you, boss. You're so generous. Rachel's expression twitched again. He glared at Huaishur and said, The great master said that's all, and there's nothing more. You should take care of yourself. So stingy. Huaishur snorted and looked at him with disdain. The feeling of ordinary goods made Rachel feel powerless. How could a person's face be so thick? He finally found a second place where he was inferior to Huaishur. But when he looked at Huaishur's face again, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel indignant. Okay, it's the third. Then he heard a high-pitched and sharp sound. It was like countless crows' sharp cries. Following Huaishur's movements, countless steel feathers emerged from the void and gathered together, turning into a cloud-like forging pattern. The outline was ferocious and mournful. Divine sword. Hatred. Rachel subconsciously took a step back. His heart palpitated. He was intimidated by such a fierce power. When Huaishur's 5 fingers loosened, the blood-colored long sword passed through the crack in the floor and fell into the eternal flame of the eternal frost furnace. Casting began. In the darkness of the cage of dreams, countless sleeping crow raised their scarlet eyes and felt the call for more. Hatred surged in the black clouds and quickly turned into a rain of blood that poured down. The alchemy fire rumbled, and the slender blade of the divine sword silently dissipated. What replaced it was countless steel crows that emerged from the void. They cried out hungrily, rolled up their iron wings, and once again soared under the dim light of the setting sun. Many ferocious shadows gathered in one place and covered the earth. His scarlet eyes looked down at the ground. The hunt had begun. Thousands of iron crows, under the support of the village of Dusk and Hatred, turned into a tidal torrent that swept across the battlefield. These cunning and cruel predators avoided all opponents that they couldn't defeat. Instead, they chose most of the large groups of hell that the other incarnations disdained to look at as their opponents. The hell creatures below the level of the leader of the horde were unable to resist the overwhelming torrent. Wherever the iron wings passed, all bodies were cleanly smashed into smithereens. Blood and origin substance were instantly sucked dry. The iron crows rose and fell like clouds on the battlefield, returning full of life and origin substance. After throwing them into the furnace, they welcomed another round of refinement before rushing back to the battlefield. The merciless hunting machines threw themselves into the slaughter, endlessly bringing new energy to the eternal frost furnace. This was the tribe that the village of Dusk loved, the large groups of hell that were perfectly compatible with the eternal frost furnace. Chapter 890. How beautiful! Gala raised his eyes and stared at the surging iron light. He smiled and said, Is that his army? As expected of the young arbiter of fate. No, it should be the great arbiter of fate, right? Although it's a little strange. Celestial genealogy's opponents should not be underestimated. Do you want to continue probing? Hercules finally finished sharpening his longsword. He held his chin and waited in boredom. No, there's no need. Gallus shook his head, regretfully. Although I hope the banquet can last longer, the organizers can't wait any longer. There aren't that many resources to squander. After saying that, he looked meaningfully at the bone tower behind him in the distance. The bone tower stood in the darkness without any response, only an indifferent gaze, overlooking the battlefield, waiting for the chess pieces to move on their own, win victory, or usher in defeat. Convey my orders. On the golden chariot, Gallus slowly stood up and grinned, revealing the sharp outline of his teeth. Don't leave any reserves. According to the plan, put all forces on the battlefield. No retreat, no hesitation, no slacking. He said, the time for the final battle has come. Thus, from that moment onwards, new changes were ushered in on the battlefield. On the Sunmaker's throne, Huaishur could not help but frown. He felt the sudden increase in pressure. The surging black tide seemed to be boiling. Behind the high wall formed by dozens of mutated angels, the black tide pressed toward the twilight village. The large group of hell that had fallen into madness rushed forward without caring about their own safety, no longer caring about the price. The operation of the twilight village suddenly became tense. It felt an unprecedented pressure. What made Huaishur even more nervous was that the huge cycle that he had built with the origin form equipment and the entire twilight village could not be maintained. Although to others it was only a momentary delay, to the great arbiter of fate, it was undoubtedly the most fatal. Once the cycle was broken, it meant that the integrated state of the entire twilight village could not be maintained. Every part would be disconnected and become a pile of loose sand, forced to fight for themselves. Correction again. Even if nothing could be seen except for a slight decline on the surface, it was observed the changes in the field. Defeated. She smiled and said, still had his large army of origin substance equipment and not origin substance equipment. He doesn't seem to understand as the highly efficient operation of the twilight village. However, you didn't tell him all of this had already given him a strange feeling. It seemed that he had overlooked he would definitely laugh out loud when he saw such a ridiculous scene. How could he be distracted? He's not a kid anymore. Such a tense battlefield. No matter how much I say focused on how detailed my reasoning is. If he doesn't understand it, it's great. He still doesn't understand it. In the illusory temple, it's better for him to Zeus raised his eyes for himself, seemingly surprised. Tongji said not bad as a favored one. Instead, but it's the way you Greeks you're a little strange. If you see something you like, you'll take it hand in hand to the finish line. Isn't that the problem? Isn't that what you mean by favored one? Zeus said, entrusted with love, bestowed with protection, and hoped that humans would be able to achieve great things. Tangi smiled but didn't say anything. It was because of this that most people who were favored by favored ones were nurtured into mommy's babies. The price of success because of the gods' favor was that they would perish because of the gods' favor. The gods' love was fickle and cruel. Relying on this kind of thing would only lead to one's own destruction. On the other hand, it's your method that's laughable, Zeus said calmly. Zeus asked indifferently, a contractor who didn't succeed because of you, who didn't believe in your care, why would he care about your existence? Of course it's because of love. Tangi winked mischievously and smiled. Love can change everything. It can also kill everything, isn't it? Zeus snorted and didn't say anything else. Or rather, he seemed to have understood something. He looked at the battlefield with pity in his eyes. It was as if he was looking at a high school student who was forced to answer an advanced mathematics question. Indeed, it was a perfect cycle, but there was still something lacking. That was still great seeming, not Yun Zhongjuan. They both maintained order and revised miracles. Great Si Ming and Yun Zhongjuan were born from the same source, but there were key differences between them. This was the key to the path of heaven's inquisition. It could be said that they were the two key points of one body with two sides. Great Si Ming's specialty was the correct way for living creatures and their race to exist, but Yun Zhongjuan's specialty was the rotation of the four seasons and the harmony of all things. Similarly, there was a decisive difference between one and many, and there was a decisive difference between the two. If Great Si Ming's focus was the many represented by the race, then Yun Zhongjuan's focus should be the one represented by me. Rain, snow, thunder, and lightning, the rotation of the four seasons, with me as the axis. There was no difference between the two. It was because of the difference between the two that the path of heaven's inquisition was divided into two paths. Even if the two paths led to the same destination, this was a problem that needed to be solved in the later stages. But now, the two paths were forcefully merged together, putting the difficult problem in front of Huaishur in advance. Zeus tasted the divine wine and looked down at the battlefield. He began to look forward to the changes that would happen next. If he couldn't maintain the balance between the many and one and only sacrificed himself blindly and lost his position, he would suffer. At the same time, Huaishur suddenly woke up from his contemplation. He felt that he was just a little bit away from the real answer, but it was too late. The abnormality had appeared. Great Si Ming's cycle wasn't broken. The crows were still flying above the battlefield. The incarnations of the origin substance equipment were still doing their jobs, and the three layers of the Twilight Village were operating as usual. Even the self-examination of the eternal frost furnace didn't find any problems. But why did the premonition of death suddenly come? When he raised his eyes and looked into the distance, he saw a huge silhouette rising from the deepest part of the darkness at the center of the large group of hell. As the thick blanket was lifted, the huge creature sleeping under it propped up its body with the help of the wheels and power. It faced the light from the distance and revealed its figure. What was that? A gigantic hell giraffe. Huaishur subconsciously rubbed his eyes, unable to understand. At the end of his line of sight was a huge wooden creation that was over 100 meters tall. It had a thick body for simple pillars and even a funny head propped up on its neck. There was also obvious fuel smeared on it. It looked like a horse at that moment. Huaishur was shocked. A wooden horse. And on the broad back of the huge wooden horse, Hercules, who had been waiting for a long time, smiled, raised his arm, and cut it with the blade of his sword, sprinkling blood. Today, I offer the blood of heroes and reenact the glory of the past. He raised his head and shouted solemnly at the sun in the sky, "Merciful gods, please give me another miracle." At that moment, a miracle fell from the sky. A long, long time ago, a great feat engraved in history, a distant legend that was difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. It was a synonym for cunning, the embodiment of a conspiracy, and the end of the long struggle on the ground because of the ownership of the golden apple. At the same time, it was the crucial fuse that caused the fall of the eternal city of Troy. As early as when Pandora offered the golden apple, the foreshadowing of this moment had already been laid down. After a long period of patience and waiting, now, the terrifying killing move that had been silent for a long time had been revealed on the battlefield with the arrival of the final battle. It was a killing move created by Grandmaster Publius himself. Mark of God, Trojan horse. At that moment, Huaishur heard the roar of a collapse. The village of Dusk glowed with a loud noise. Countless steel screeched, and the huge city walls began to collapse involuntarily. The illusory wooden horse passed through the battlefield. Wherever it passed, no damage could touch its body. It was as if it was being pulled forward by countless people. Just like that, it broke into the heart of the village of Dusk as fast as lightning. The city's defenses, which were strong enough to withstand countless mutants, actually collapsed without a fight in front of this wooden horse, falling apart and falling apart. The village of Dusk had now lost all its barriers. As for the huge wooden horse, with a strange smile, it passed through the countless cannons and blazing lights and arrived in front of the furnace of eternal frost. As the wooden horse's thick carapace fell apart, the warriors who had been waiting for a long time in the darkness clenched their swords and roared. Under the leadership of Hercules' Publius Creations, the Argonaut heroes broke through. In an instant, they collided with the paladins of Charlemagne's knights, and a fierce battle that could only advance and not retreat began. As the wooden horse gradually shattered and burned, the last figure slowly walked out. Holding a scythe in his hand, the figure was almost naked. Only the countless golden accessories reflected the ghostly light of the soul. "How are you, my friend?" Gala raised his head and stared at Huaishur on the furnace of eternal frost. He raised the corner of his mouth happily and showed Huaishur the bright dagger in his other hand. The gorgeous dagger, which looked like it was made of crystal, was engraved with countless runes and shrouded in layers of arrays. In the shimmering facets of the crystal, countless phantoms from hell appeared. It was as if the essence of hell itself had been materialized. He was holding it in his hand. "I like this thing so much." Gala laughed, raised the dagger, and stabbed it into his chest with a backhand. Then a terrifying dark shadow gushed out of his body like a torrent, covering the sky and the sun, turning into a terrifying situation like a volcanic eruption. At this moment, as Gala moved forward, the entire furnace of eternal frost began to shake. Behind Gala, a solemn and cold phantom slowly appeared. He was riding a strange beast that looked like a giant dragon, holding a poisonous spear in his hand. The three heads were the middle-aged face of an emperor, the head of a bull full of cracks, and the head of an evil and cold skeleton of a sheep. Hell's sequence, supreme four pillars Asmodeus, was here to show himself. "Come, come, my friend." Gala held the scythe tightly and felt the infinite power coming from his body. He laughed and spread his wings, whistling toward the throne of Sunmaker. "Our banquet has just begun. Chapter 891. A hurricane swept through in an instant, accompanied by a shrill sound that made countless ears bleed. It was as if some steel behemoths had collided in an instant, bringing about a turbulence that engulfed the entire Dusk Village. Countless steel floorboards warped and vibrated, emitting a resonance that was hard to be heard by the human ear. The fine sound overlapped and turned into a tide, shrinking toward the tower in the center. 3 times. Everything condensed in the snap of a finger. Triple drummer, thunderbolt. It was no longer a power that the body could bear. It was almost equivalent to the power of the entire Dusk Village being output in an instant, colliding with Gala's power, exuding a terrifying destructive power. With just one blow, the opponent that was charging at him was sent flying in an instant. It was like a great hit in a baseball field. Even Gala, who had transformed into the upper 4 pillars, could not resist it. He was sent flying like a meteor. He was severely injured and almost flew out of the entire Helios, disappearing into the empty universe. Mastery, symphony. Huaisher's hand that was holding the hateful water split open. Blood could not flow out before it quickly healed. He could only feel that the lingering sound still remained in his body, vibrating endlessly. The blow just now had perfectly mobilized the power of the entire Dusk Village, relying on the support of the furnace of eternal frost, and even its bearing capacity. It was as if a small part of Helios had suddenly jumped into the air, using its terrifying mass to step on Gala's face. Huaisher was only affected by a little bit of the aftershock. Even so, he was about to explode from the immense power. His soul and the stigmata also cracked under the blow. His fingers twitched, almost unable to hold his weapon. The instant judgment made Huaisher grit his teeth and make such a choice. The situation had deteriorated to the extreme. Under the invasion of the Trojan horse, the defense of the Dusk Village had completely collapsed. After losing the advantage of being on the defensive side, they had to face an enemy that was dozens of times their own. Not to mention that the Argo Legion created by Publius had already reached the furnace of eternal frost. Plus, there was a crown wearer who had fused with the infernal sequence, the supreme 4 pillars. The only thing he could do now was to eliminate the biggest threat in front of him as quickly as possible. He only hoped that this blow could injure his opponent and cause effective damage. But very quickly, his heart sank to the bottom of the valley, for Gala, unharmed, rose from the shadows again and grinned at him. The infernal sequence. The first 4 pillars was the alchemist's excavation of the power of hell and the utilization of the essence of calamity. It could be said that it was the embodiment of the essence of hell. There were a total of 72 hells, which perfectly covered the majority of hells. The power of the lords of the hells was further divided by their ranks. There was no doubt that the ones at the top were the supreme 4 pillars, who were comparable to the rulers. After fusing with the authoritative relic of the supreme 4 pillars, Asmodeus, Gala had been forcibly raised to the boundary of a ruler, although this power was innately insufficient, causing it to shrink greatly compared to a true ruler. But Asmodeus' authority was the real deal. The demon king, who was known as Lust, and the leader of the evil spirits, did not control hypocritical love. Instead, it was a temptation that could make all souls fall into the abyss and freeze. There were countless ways to toy with souls and use origin substances. Souls were the most important currency to him. If there were no souls for him to use, then this authority was no different from a decoration. But as long as there were souls in his hands, Asmodeus could display the power comparable to the Creator. Coincidentally, Gala had plenty of souls. On his body, there were countless golden ornaments, imprisoning the souls of all his opponents for a long time. All the losers he defeated were bound by the golden ornaments day and night, suffering torment. Even Gala himself did not know how many there were in his collection. Too many wars, too many enemies. As long as he followed the Withered King, he would never lack these blood-boiling battles and hearty victories. A trick of the heretic king? How nostalgic. Not a bad trick, my friend. Unfortunately, it's still a little lacking. Gala laughed, stepping on the void, step by step, his eyes burning with excitement. Come, let us begin again. In his hand, the scythe overflowed with the brilliance of souls. Countless blessings and curses were applied to it, causing this vicious weapon to quickly sublimate into a sharp blade that could wound everything. It was like a meteor that represented disaster. In the whistling sound, Gala once again descended from the sky. Hwai sure gritted his teeth, holding the hateful water tightly. Mastery, symphony, the power of the Twilight Village once again, along with the mighty echo, condensed into a point and blasted forward, causing the crimson meteor to fly backward. Hwai sure spat out mouthfuls of blood, but almost instantly, Gala, who was prepared, returned with a ferocious smile. Looking down at his pale face, the solidified one curled his finger. What's wrong? Sitting on that chair and not willing to get down? If you want to sit and wait for death, I don't mind. Hwai sure was silent and did not answer. Listening to the sounds of fighting coming from below, he finally could not help but sigh. He had to admit that he was not a match. Even if he sat on the entire Twilight Village, he could not use the power of the Sunmaker. In front of the solidified one, he could only passively defend. Once he left the eternal frozen furnace, he would immediately be beaten back to his original form and be killed instantly. But Tongi had run off somewhere, and Garland was playing dead even when the enemy was under siege. He did not know what he was doing. Now, he could only rely on himself. He sighed and raised his hand. The ultimate, open. Gala's expression changed slightly, and he took a few steps back in the air. Obviously, he had already known about Hwai Sure. He had heard about the terrible threat of this move from Hercules. If he was not careful, he would be contaminated by the thing inside, and he would have to face the erosion of the eternal beast, unless he returned to hell and asked the Withered King for help. Even he could not do anything about it. But now, Hwai Sure did not intend to use it as a weapon. In the situation where the opponent was prepared, this move was basically useless and could only be used to scare people. What he wanted to do was not to release, but to transfer, as the eternal frozen furnace and the ultimate were once again connected. The casting furnaces of the same origin began to resonate again. They forcibly stripped most of the derived flesh of the eternal beast from Hwai Sure's body, sealed it in the alchemy fire, and forcibly suppressed it with surging divinity. Hwai Sure had once again recovered the power of his heyday, the complete body of Great Seeming. Slowly, he clenched the water of hatred in his hand. In that case, there was only one answer left. Gala's eyes widened, and he became more and more excited. Finally going to fight with all your strength. He grinned expectantly. Before his voice died away, Gala was stunned, because Hwai Sure did not get up from the Sunmaker's throne at all. He just lifted half of the broken spear, turned his hand, and threw it into the furnace behind him. Forging begin. In an instant, a loud sound like a surging tide burst out from within. Divinity was burning wildly. In the shroud of the alchemy fire, the lightning in the water of hatred rose, and the crazy roar from a long time ago sounded. The light of the flames illuminated Hwai Sure's smile. You know, he held his chin and studied his opponent's expression. The corners of his mouth curled up into a happy smile. In our celestial genealogy, there is a good tradition. If you can't beat him, you will call for help. Known condition 1. The alchemy fire had the attribute of completely stimulating the potential of all materials. Known Condition 2, the eternal frozen furnace was the best casting furnace in the world. Known Condition 3, the water of hatred was once Yun Zhongjuan's stigmata relic. Known Condition 4, Huaishur still had a lot of divinity that he got from Garland for free. Known Condition 5, Huaishur's nirvana transformation and biological rebirth could give alchemy products the attribute of animation. Known Condition 6, Huaishur still had something like the Book of Destiny in his hands. So, Gala, who doesn't know anything, please tell me what will pop out of his furnace next. At that moment, Gala's face suddenly changed. The brilliance of thousands of souls covered the scythe blade and turned into a fleeting, fanatical brilliance. Together with him, they fell from the sky toward Huaishur, toward the eternal frozen furnace where Huaishur was. He did his best. What was faster than him was the darkness that erupted from the furnace fire. It was a pure and huge disaster. Just its existence was enough to distort the whole world and break the miracle. Like a volcanic eruption, the darkness rolled like clouds. In an instant, it shrouded the entire twilight village and even covered the eternal dim light, causing everything to fall into darkness where one could not see their own fingers. That was hatred. 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 Under that incomparably pure hatred, even the entire twilight village resonated. But it was different from the resentment left by the former casters. It was a hatred that never yielded, never retreated, and never regretted. It contained indescribable hatred. It hated this world, hated all the cowards, hated all the betrayers, hated the death of its companions, and hated its own powerlessness. It hated everything. Even the thing it hated the most was hell. The hatred was like a tide, enough to fill the 7 seas, cover the realm, and turn into a destructive tide. It wiped out all the impurities, pulled all the enemies, and completely perished with itself. It was hard to imagine what kind of soul could leave behind such a huge hatred. What kind of obsession could make this hatred so pure that it could distort the world? Now, the hatred had turned into an ocean in the clouds. From the deep sea, the sleeping broken souls crazily devoured the flesh and blood derived from the eternal beast, extracting the endless vitality from it. Once again, from the darkness, it opened its eyes. It cast a hateful glance at the mortal world. "Look, Gala," it sneered. Chapter 892. Boom! At that moment, the eternal frost furnace shook violently, and the entire twilight village responded with a loud bang. Countless steel vibrations turned into pure and shrill thunder. The tide of hatred gushing out from the furnace suddenly shrank and turned into a huge monster that could cover the entire twilight village. The jaw-dropping silhouette was like a giant whale that roamed the 7 seas, but on its back there was a pair of wings that could even cover the heavens and the earth. That's a Kunpeng. Huaishur's eyeballs almost fell out. He couldn't believe it. In the sea of hatred, the huge Kunpeng swung its huge tail, causing the sound of overlapping waves to burst out in the void. It crashed toward the falling Gala. Demonic clown, you can't even withstand a single blow. On the back of the Kunpeng, a phantom of the past appeared. The old figure raised a finger. It flicked out. In an instant, the darkness was torn apart. Countless dazzling lights filled every inch of the air. With the Kunpeng's collision, tens of thousands of lightning bolts burst out. The falling scarlet meteor rolled back and fell to the ground, smashing a huge crack. In the burning lightning, Gala raised his eyes and stared at the phantom that appeared in midair. A hoarse voice came from his throat. "Yes, Feng, Zhou." The blazing light of the burning souls appeared again. Asmodeus Phantom appeared again. All the wounds quickly healed. The brilliance of the burning souls turned into sharp blades. With Gala's movement, they appeared from the ground and pointed at the Kuan Pung in the sky. There was no need to think. Facing the most presumptuous loner in the abyss in the past, the majestic light that once shone into hell from the kingdom of heaven, he chose to go all out. Hundreds of souls were burned in Asmodeus' hand again. They turned into wandering stars and whizzed out. On the back of the Kuan Pung, the phantom of the past only glanced at him with contempt. Once again, he raised a finger. He pointed at the sky that was overflowing with the sea of hatred. In an instant, dark clouds covered the sky. The iron moths also melted. They swept up endless water vapor and fell into
amidst
the
the
thick
thunder
sea
clouds.
of clouds. Heaven's gates,
The pitch-black
existence
clouds
shrouded
covered
Asmodeus'
everything
projection
like
from
an
afar,
iron curtain,
causing those burning souls to
10,000
instantly
creations
disintegrate.
and the finger
on the
began
side
to circulate.
Why sure subconsciously
Countless
reached
amounts of
out
origin
and prepared to
substance
counterattack,
filled the finger,
causing the
while
hatred
he's
to
sick.
become as
Give this
solid
bastard
as
a good
steel.
beating.
When the two
Senior,
forces collided,
there's no need to talk
destructive
about the
sparks
righteousness
flew
of the
everywhere.
pugilistic world.
No one
when
could
dealing
raise
with
their
this
head
kind
to
of
look
devil
directly
why
at this
sure
sea
summoned
of
a
lightning
tide of crows
at this moment
and turned them into
in the
sharp
sky above the
blades of
Kuan
resentment.
Pung. The
Let's go
lightning in
together
the dark clouds
and,
was moving,
shoulder
outlining the image
before
of a
he could
cold
finish
and
his
lofty
sentence.
city.
He sensed
It was a sacred
that
realm
Ing
that
Fangzhou's
existed in
after image
contrast
was
to
looking
great
at him.
Si Ming's
That
ruins
kind
of
of gaze
end.
perfectly
It
describes
was
the
Yun
strength of the
Zhongjuan's
previous
generation
axis
of
miracle.
Yun Zhongjuan as a
Heavenly thought.
powerhouse of his
Activate.
generation. It was an extremely vivid representation of the care and love an old senior had for his successor. To put it simply, it was little brother, step back a little, you stay here and don't move. I'll go plant a few acres of orange trees for you. And most importantly, don't get in the way. Through the flesh and blood of the eternal beast, the broken soul of the past was reborn, still retaining the arrogance of the past. But when he saw why sure stop, he became even more unhappy. If you want to fight, then fight. If you don't want to fight, then don't fight. Why are you dawdling? Young people nowadays are getting more and more outrageous. Huaishi's eyes twitched wildly. Twitching. So, are you going to fight or not? Watch carefully, kid. Ing Fangzhou retracted his gaze, looked down at the enemy indifferently, and told him, "This is the real dead water." Accompanied by his words, the ocean of hatred was stirred by an invisible pillar, setting off layers of waves. Accompanied by the rolling of the clouds like angry waves, a huge vortex appeared. Then, in the burst of lightning, countless dazzling and glaring lightning burst out from it. They converged with each other, converging into a sharp and mournful edge, piercing toward the ground. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter rotated here. The 4 seasons changed in a snap of the fingers, as if a long time had gathered on it, turning into an iron edge. The rolling Yangtze River flows east. The waves wash away the heroes. Now, the water of the Yangtze River comes from the sky. The real dead water spear fell from the sky amidst the thunderbolts. The brilliance of countless burning souls was instantly pierced through by the sharp blade comparable to time. Then, after tearing apart Asmodeus's projection, it pierced through Gala's body. It nailed him to the chaotic battlefield. Then, the killing move from Yun Zhongjuan fell from the sky. When Ing Fangzhou raised his finger, endless amounts of water vapor gathered and turned into frost, sealing the area within 10,000 miles in ice. Then, the world of extreme cold disintegrated in the boiling. After the torrent of hot air rolled up to the sky, the rapidly condensing water turned into a rainstorm, falling from the sky together with the thunderbolts. Extreme cold, high temperature, thunderbolts, exhaustion in an instant, surrounded by the blade of dead water. A hellish ravage descended. Countless hellish creatures tried to break free, but the thunder and lightning that followed like a shadow lashed down from the ocean of hatred, leaving charred corpses and wreckage all over the ground. In an instant, except for the Greek heroes who were protected by the blessings of the gods, the rest of the mutants and hellish creatures were all turned into ashes. As early as the moment the prison of Thunder's spear fell from the sky, extinction was already destined. Huaishur was stunned. Unbelievable. They were both on the road of heaven's inquisition. Why was there such a big difference? Why was the senior's AoE like eating and drinking water, and it was a large-scale attack? He was actually suppressing Asmodeus. It was as if he was trampled under his feet. Wasn't this a bit too much? At this moment, Huaishur expressed pity for the enemy from the bottom of his heart. It was not because the authority of the Supreme Four Pillars was too weak, nor was it because Gala's preparation was insufficient, nor was it because Yun Zhongjuan's power was too terrifying. It was because his opponent was too strong. Even if this strength was just the moon in the mirror, the flower in the water, even Ing Fangzhou himself knew how short this resurrection was. Even with the flesh and blood of the eternal beast, the dead still could not be resurrected. At best, it was just a reappearance of the past records. Everything about Ing Fangzhou, the last abyss explorer of the kingdom of heaven, recorded by the hateful water. His pride, his hatred, and his anger, after combining with life in the furnace, once again summoned the silhouette of the past, as Yun Zhongjuan, who was promoted from Li Huan, Hebo, and Xiangjuan. At this moment, Ing Fangzhou had lost the strongest characteristic of this system. That was the almost endless source of energy reserves. Now, he was just the incarnation of the hateful water, an empty living stigmata relic. Even Yun Zhongjuan's miracle was just a remnant sealed in the hateful water. What really made Huaishur dumbfounded was the way he used his power. The moment he appeared, he actually bypassed Huaishur's control and forcibly took over the operation of the Twilight Village, as well as his large group. It was as if a grumpy old senior who was smoking and watching a show finally couldn't stand it anymore. He suddenly jumped down, grabbed the mouse and keyboard, and then smoothly typed out a gorgeous operation and an SSS rating that Huaishur could not imagine. Sword fighting, defense, taunting, attacking, switching weapons, and mid-air combos. Every action was so smooth and concise that it moved people to the point of tears. Look carefully, kid, this is how you fight. That was a completely different method from Great Seeming. In an instant, all the large groups were reorganized, and the connection between each other and the flow of divinity was adjusted again. In the end, the entire huge cycle was reconstructed around Yun Zhongjuan in the blink of an eye. It was as if he had turned into the axis of heaven and earth, and everything flowed under his control. He exquisitely extracted every strand of power, gathered it in the clouds, gathered it with thunder, and operated it. Finally, he integrated all the large groups and the output of all the power of the entire Twilight Village. It was even more powerful than that. In a daze, the corner of Huaishur's eyes twitched again. Why was this scene so familiar? It felt like he was taking a failing paper to a cram school and making up for it on the spot. After combining Great Si Ming's large group with Yun Zhongjuan's control method, the combination of the two actually erupted a terrifying power that was beyond his imagination. Now, thousands of thunderbolts once again descended from the sky. In an instant, the remnant body on the ground was completely engulfed. Asmodeus's illusion completely collapsed, but with the brilliance of the soul, Gala's figure once again emerged from the darkness outside the Twilight Village, reformed and restored to its complete form, but the golden ornament on one of its arms had lost its brilliant luster. You actually killed me once. Amazing. He lowered his head and looked at the shattered collection, swung his hand, and threw away the broken containers without any reluctance. He looked up and stared at the old figure under the thunderclouds in amazement. He did not hide his admiration. Ing Fangzhou, you are indeed a great enemy of my king. Even after death, you still have such amazing destructive power. Gala nodded slowly. I have to admit, even with the support of the Supreme Four Pillars, this present carrier is far from your match. Nonsense, stop talking. Fangzhou coldly raised his finger, and the spear of dead water, wrapped in thunder and lightning, pierced through the air again, and instantly destroyed the mirror image. But another mirror image regenerated from the air in an instant. So impatient. Huh? Very good, very good. Your death is indeed the collection of my lord. Gala laughed heartily. If I'm not wrong, your power now should come from that strange hell device. Right at this moment, the eyes of the solidified one burned with a crimson light from hell. If that's the case, even that thing, destroy it together. With his words under his feet, countless cannon fodder died on the spot, one by one. Only the broken souls and source substances continuously rose into the sky, gathered in his hand, and turned into a vast scene of dark stars. Extracting the power of the army under his command, Asmodeus's authority descended and recreated the terrifying existence of the abyss. At this moment, countless skeletons wriggled and piled on top of each other, turning into a strange and ferocious giant statue. Thousands of arms held the offered souls tightly, and a distorted face suddenly raised, and 3 hollow eyes opened, staring at Fangzhou's figure. It opened its mouth. It spewed out a black and purple brilliance that covered the sky and earth. The curse from the ruler of the Sumerian underworld, Iliger, was enough to destroy all life. Chapter 893. After breaking away from Yun Zhongjuan suppression, Gala immediately mobilized the authority of Asmodeus. After combining countless souls, It briefly recreated a reflection of the great god of the underworld, Iliger. Even though it was fleeting, this torrent was no different from the mighty power of the gods. As long as there were enough souls, there was no disaster in this world that Asmodeus could not control. Although this unpredictable authority was not compatible with Gala, the instinct of a warrior was enough to let him exert the destructive power of Asmodeus to the fullest. Now, the great destruction that was almost engraved by the gods had arrived here. Overwhelming black and purple light spewed out from the cracked mouth of the reflection, instantly turning everything in front of it into dust. The vast and mighty flow brought down the punishment from the underworld. On the Kunping, Ing Fangzhou finally raised his eyes. His 5 fingers clenched. In an instant, the sea of hatred rolled over, and the flowing water spear formed by intertwined thunderbolts fell from the sky. 1, 2, 3. For, like a giant pillar falling from the sky, it shrouded the front of the twilight village and turned into a blazing dike. The thunderbolts and the light of curse collided with each other, and violent turbulence was transmitted to the entire twilight village, causing Huaishir, who was in the center, to feel an illusory pain. He felt a large amount of source substance being swallowed by Yun Zhongjuan's celestial palace and transformed into thunderbolts. But then, below the furnace of eternal frost, in the chaotic battlefield, there was a shrill sound of something breaking through the air. Hercules, the legendary hero who inherited the divine blood, roared and killed the paladin in front of him. Ignoring the surrounding knights who were besieging him, he stood still in a pool of blood, took off the longbow on his back, and aimed at the Kunping in the clouds. He was sharp enough to seize this fleeting opportunity. The arrow personally forged by the Grandmaster transformed into cold moonlight on the bowstring. The blessing from the moon goddess Selene descended here, turning into an arrow of moonlight that would cause all enemies to lose their minds and fall into madness. It flew silently into the sky. Only the sound of the bowstring vibrating was like the mournful cry of the souls. The blood moon arrow that plundered the will instantly tore through the dark clouds and torrential rain, leaving a straight dark trace. In an instant, it was close at hand, but it suddenly stopped. It hovered in front of Ing Fangzhou's other palm. It was clamped down by an invisible force, firmly stuck in the air. Soon after, a second mournful wail burst forth, and a third. In the blink of an eye, 6 blood moon arrows pierced through the air, one after another. They trembled violently, struggled, and could not move an inch forward. Ing Fangzhou's left hand suddenly clenched. The moonlight arrow shattered, and the 5 fingers of his left hand were also cut by the sharpness. Dozens of cuts crisscrossed, deep enough to see the bones. The frenzied curse wrapped around the wound, wriggling like thorns as it rapidly penetrated deep into the wound. Huaishir started up the foundry again. Alchemy fire appeared out of nowhere and wrapped around Ing Fangzhou's palm. It forcefully devoured the curse of the thorns and turned it into a scarlet iron piece that fell off from the wound, stripping away the consequences. But Huaishir's vision went black, and the taste of blood appeared in his throat. Even though he had the hand of confinement and great Si Ming's birth of Yang talent, the sudden transformation was still a huge blow to him. He gritted his teeth and raised his hand again, wanting to interfere more. However, a bolt of lightning appeared out of nowhere and bound him to the spot. He was not allowed to interfere anymore. Only the sound of cracks spreading could be heard in the rumbling. Huaishir looked up, but he could not see the distant figure clearly. He only felt that he could no longer suppress his anger. He finally felt the arrogance that Russell once mentioned. Until now, you're still holding on and not letting others interfere? Are you an old auntie in some kindergarten? Huaishir struggled to break the lightning that bound him and roared, "What are you doing?" "Doing what I should do." A hoarse voice was heard amidst the thunderous roar. Ing Fangzhou finally turned around and looked at the angry junior, telling him, "You should also do what you should do. Why sure?" He said, "You don't have to care about the rest," on the cracked face. His eyes were so calm. That wasn't arrogance, but stubbornness. She wanted to hide everything that was important behind her back, put it in the safest place. Only then could he focus on the front. Only then could he complete his mission. Huaisher paused for a moment and froze in place. Finally, he slowly sat back down on his chair. A silent sigh. Soon, the eternal frost furnace faithfully conveyed the orders from the user, causing the entire Twilight Village to operate again. An endless stream of power gathered from Huaisher's hands. Under Huaisher's control, it was thrown into the projection of the Kuan Peng. An angry bull, a compassionate giant deer, a solemn white horse, a resentful crow. All the power of the origin substance equipment appeared from the dark clouds and became a part of the cold light. "This is what I can do for you, Ing Fangzhou," Huaisher said softly. "I'll leave the rest to you." In that instant, the corners of Ing Fangzhou's mouth lifted slightly on his cracked face. It was as if he was smiling. So gratified. "Very good. Why, sure. As long as it was like this. Please take a good look," he said. "What I can teach you, it was not the lessons of those predecessors that were not worth emulating, nor was it the fate of wandering that could not be called success, nor was it the lonely waiting without any results. It was the only thing that Ing Fangzhou was proud of in his life, the last remnant. How to fight, how to protect the world, how to become the Lord of the Clouds. In the siege, the lonely figure raised his hand again and clenched the spear of lost water that extended from the thunderclouds. It stirred the wind and clouds. The Kuan Peng spread its wings, and the mighty whale's song echoed from the clouds. Lightning burst out again. It flew out from Ing Fangzhou's hand and turned into a sharp edge that crossed thousands of miles. It pierced through the black-purple torrent, tore the reflection of God, and illuminated Gala's pupils. Once again, it tore open a gash in his chest. Then, the lightning gathered again and turned into a heavy spear that was several meters long from his hand. It turned, swept, and forced Hercules to retreat. The lightning flashed, and the moonlight arrow was torn apart, along with Gala's counterattack. In midair, Hercules reached out and pulled out a long sword that shone with brilliance. Attack! In the distance, Gala was reborn again, and the authority of Asmodeus descended again. The burning star appeared out of thin air and fell toward the land of dusk. Heaven and earth roared. Only the thunderclouds rose, and hatred swept across. Under the siege of the Supreme Four Pillars and the legendary heroes, the former Lord of the Clouds once again showed the power that once guarded the abyss and defended the realm. In the illusory temple, Zeus put down his wine glass in admiration. He stared intently. Is there such a hero in the current era? Such a pure soul is really admirable. It is the era of humans that such a soul will exist, Zeus. Tangi held her chin and whispered softly, "He does not expect the approval of the weak, nor does he rely on the grace of the stronger. This is an arrogant soul that can never be cultivated by relying on the care and protection of God." Zeus shook his head. It's hard to imagine that such a proud person would die for others. Of course, his soul belongs to himself. Tangi laughed. However, he chose to give his soul to the future he guarded. He had entrusted everything to his successor. What remained was the brilliance that still shone even in the darkest abyss, just like the stars. "Do you see, Zeus?" She smiled and told him, "The era of humans was started by such a soul. The era of God has not ended yet. Tangi..." Zeus raised his eyes. It's still too early to say this, at that moment, accompanied by his words. On the ground, light shone again. It came from the depths of the land of dusk. At this moment, above the thunderclouds, in the dark universe sky, countless distant stars suddenly burst out with dazzling brilliance. A rainbow slowly rose from the ground. It came from the Tower of Garand. In the furnace of blood fever, the Grand Master, who had been silent for a long time, raised his eyes and looked at the giant hand that was holding the sun, willed tightly and pulling the earth. It's time to make a break. My friend, complicated Celtic runes appeared beneath his feet and gathered, surrounding and protecting the rotting rope in his hand. It continuously extracted origin, substance, and divinity and poured them into the rope. Around the array, dozens of ancient relics from the Celtic lineage, those vessels that represented the great miracles of the past, shattered one after another. Only the crystals made by God flew up like dust, gathered, and merged into the chain in Garen's hand. This caused the rainbow that rose from the ground to extend endlessly into the universe. It pulled the light of the stars and quickly approached this huge disc-shaped world. In the end, it turned into a dazzling river of stars, flowing mightily. The long ceremony finally came to an end. At this moment, when Garland slowly raised his hand, the ancient rope in his hand merged with the rainbow and extended upwards endlessly. The void of the rainbow intertwined with the flowing Milky Way, forming a vast and majestic scene. It was as if a human's hand had replaced the power of God, guiding the movement of the stars. It caused the miracles of the past to reappear here. In the circle of the rainbow and the galaxy, a light that could not be ignored jumped out from the void, continuously extracting the light of the stars and burning fiercely. In the blink of an eye, the entire world darkened under its shadow. In this world, other than the sun that represented God, there was only this bit of light that existed for a long time. However, this light did not illuminate everything. Instead, it restrained all the power. Only needle-like rays of light jumped out from its outline, causing the rainbow and the void of the galaxy to tremble. Garen's secret ritual, the dozens of relics of the stigmata that he brought from the present realm, and all the miracles that the Grand Master could create, even all the summoned creatures of Charlemagne's knights were offered as sacrifices. All the destruction, all the power, were contained in this small point. This was Garen's counterattack. In the distant past, one of the prototypes of the oldest weapons of mankind, the power of destruction that was forged by the new generation of Celtic kings, gathered all the power of the Danu gods. It had once killed the previous ruler of the deep sea, the lord of the evil eye, Balor, and created a new era of weapons. Its name was Divine Mark Luger's Chain. Sensing the killing intent directed at Pubris, Hercules' expression suddenly changed. He ignored Fangzhou, who was besieged, and urged the flying boots from Hermes to return to the giant Tower of Light. Unfortunately, it was too late. The moment the light appeared, the rope formed by the rainbow and the galaxy quickly shrank and pulled, as if it was held tightly by an invisible hand, and began to swing. A huge gravitational force pulled the light spot that no matter could get close to, circling in the desolate universe, accumulating a huge amount of power. Even the rope of stars could not bear such a heavy object, and cracks kept appearing on it. In the end, when the gravitational force formed by the rainbow and the galaxy was completely broken, they turned into dazzling rays of light and scattered in all directions. The ball of light, which scholars called ultradense matter, finally swept across the air in an insignificant arc and flew out of the collapsing gravitational rope. At that moment, a premonition of death emerged in Huaishir's heart. Even if this was just a brush with death, It flew straight into the distance. Chapter 894. It was as if a genuine condensation of death was flying over his head. Wherever it passed, an endless gravitational force ravaged everything. Cracks appeared on the steel ground, and the disc-shaped sun chariot also started to tilt and bend. Even though it was over 1,000 meters away, it was still unable to withstand this rolling, formless pearl. Even the slightest shockwave had lifted the entire Twilight Village by several meters, almost pulling it out of the surface. If it hit, he and the projection of the entire Twilight Village, no, at least 1/3 of Helios would be completely engulfed and melted in that radiance. So, Garland had been cooped up in the base for so long just to build a nuclear weapon? No. Even if its destructive power was almost the same as a nuclear weapon, it was completely different. It was fundamentally different in nature and essence. In such a short period of time, using the mystic instrument to trace back to the unique environment of Helios, the authority of the second Danu divine king, Luge, was quickly restored. Divinity was injected, and through the conversion of calamity and miracle, the illusory starlight was given substance. Gathering the power from Hell's projection, it finally formed a genuine super-dense body from the present realm. It was something that could no longer be described as material. The terrifying density that surpassed a neutron star had exceeded the present realm's bearing limit and was hovering on the brink of collapse. The slightest touch would trigger a terrible change that would shatter heaven and earth, just like now. In an instant, the luminous bullet that devoured all radiance crossed the two ends of Helios and descended from the sky. Hercules' interception and Pubris' defense were all pierced like phantoms. And finally, the two came into contact. For an instant, it broke its fragile shell. As a result, the destruction contained within flowed out. After devouring all light, what surged out was a darkness that surpassed the universe's primordial darkness. Huaishur wanted to cover his ears, but the senses from Supreme kept transmitting the terrible tremors from the distance, causing streaks of blood to seep out of his mouth and nose. His ears were ringing. Anyone with a little bit of education in physics, even a child, could understand what kind of terrifying phenomenon would occur when the mass and density of an object broke through the limit to the point where even the gravitational force of a neutron star could not restrain it. The existence known as the black hole had descended in an instant. Did such a thing really exist? Could such a phenomenon really be maintained? Could such a level of power really be controlled? At this moment, such a question no longer had any meaning. Huaishur could only see that the darkness had swallowed all the light and turned into a vortex of destruction. It quickly, coldly, and cruelly swallowed the tower where Pubris was. Equality destroyed all miracles and disasters. Before that, Hades' bone pagoda had already been destroyed like an illusion. Huaishur was stunned for a moment and realized that something was wrong. Hades' bone pagoda disappeared. No, he didn't hear any sounds of collapse at all. It was as if it was just a bubble. It should be said that it was an illusion that was enough to pass off as real. But Helios was only so big, so where was Hades' pagoda? In an instant, the answer appeared in his mind, but he couldn't help but be terrified. Ignoring the burning of the cosmic rays in his eyes, he looked straight at the location of the black hole. At the top of the pagoda, at the edge of the critical distance, a thin figure seemed to have appeared. He was smiling coldly in Garland's direction. Hades. Just like that, the chief disciple of Helios opened his arms and embraced destruction in place of Pubris. Gala's loud laughter could be heard in the wind. This was the conversation between the chief disciple of Helios and the wearer of the Hell's Crown in Hades' temple before the final battle began. What do you mean? Gala looked coldly at his summoner. Whatever you like, that's all. Hades replied calmly. I don't care how great the battle results you can create, nor do I need you to eliminate any enemies for me, nor do I expect you to bring me any returns. Gala, no matter what request you have, as long as it is within my power, I will provide it for you. As for you, you just need to do what you like. After a short silence, Gala raised his eyes and understood. In other words, you want me to be the bait. It doesn't matter if you want to understand it that way. Hades asked, will you refuse, Gala? Of course not. Gala grinned and couldn't help but laugh. There are employers who don't expect victory, and there are fools who don't expect anything in return after paying money. Why would I refuse such a good thing? Very good. Hades nodded and sincerely blessed him. Then go ahead and fight your war as you wish. I hope you can reap joy in this battle. What about you, Hades? Gala didn't leave. He still stood in the same place and looked at his summoner. You even gave up victory. What do you want to get? You are mistaken about one thing, Gala. Hades shook his head. Some people have no chance of winning from the beginning. Why would I give up? What I can do is actually no different from what you can do. But the difference is that regardless of victory or defeat, the results will not belong to me. Then what are you looking for, Your Excellency Jester? Gala asked curiously. I have seen too many people like you in the abyss, but you are completely different from your colleagues. What are you looking for? The success of the conspiracy? The realization of revenge? Or the death of the enemy? After you give up all these, what can you get? Yes, what can I get? Hedi laughed mockingly, as if she was thinking, from the very beginning, people like me were destined to not be able to obtain anything, so I actually never thought of such a problem. Gala, if you ask me what I want, then I can only answer you like this. The alchemist, who had already been aware of his fate and ending, laughed. Probably it is a result that was destined before birth. What came before the result was death. When the light dissipated, the skeletal tower below revealed its true appearance. The world was always so strange. Once a coat of light was put on, few people would suspect that there was anything under the light. Now, the disguise was unveiled, and the time for destruction had come. Under the terrible destructive power of Luger's chain, all of Hades's defenses were ineffective, and he was naturally sucked into the rapidly shrinking black hole without any resistance. Along with the rapidly annihilating superdense substance, his soul and body were completely and irretrievably reduced to ashes. This is really terrible. In the eternal frost furnace, Huaishur did not feel happy at all. Instead, a strong sense of vigilance and uneasiness rose. From the beginning, Publius's position was a scam. He did not personally host the mystic instrument of creation, and the one who carried it out in his place was Hades. Otherwise, the mystic instrument of creation would have been completed long ago. No, who knew what Garland would do to interfere? When the omnipotent grandmasters fought each other, they had to be prepared for each other's countermeasures before making a decision. Like a matryoshka doll, they had to be constantly on guard. So-called miracles were things that exceeded common sense. Who knew what other tricks a grandmaster had up his sleeves? Publius's weakness was that he had to be exposed to the sun to maintain the operation of the mystic instrument. But if someone was willing to make the sacrifice, everything would naturally be different. But if Hades disguised himself as Publius and attracted Garland's attack in his place, then where did Publius go? Huaishur ignored the burning pain in his eyeballs and widened his eyes to look into the distance. But all he could see was a shattered land riddled with holes. It was a scene of desolation. Deep fissures had appeared on the ground, leaving behind tragic traces that had almost chiseled through Helios. The Tower of Light had long since disappeared. But why were there still shadows left on the spot? A chill crept up the back of Huaishi's head. The moment the Tower of Light disappeared, the shattered shadow of the tower on the ground that was full of fissures actually dared to bulge, as if it had substance. It pulled countless shadows, gathered and weaved, and grew rapidly, on top of the pure black, lightless tower, surrounded by countless complex arrays. The alchemist named Publius raised his eyes and looked in this direction indifferently. He raised his palm and pointed at the final calamity, the village of dusk. At the top of the shadow tower, the sun that had already descended to the mortal world released rays as bright and scorching as the real sun. That was a temperature that could only be named after a star. Even though there was still a long way to go before he reached the position of a god, the current Publius was undoubtedly the closest person in the world to becoming a god. At this moment, above Helios, the illusory sun had broken free from the control of the three great seals. It was no longer the outflow of the spirit essence pillar, but had become a genuine amalgamation of heat energy. As the sun, it had to release light. Now, a terrifying stream of light that was enough to burn away life, melt steel, and evaporate dust had arrived. More than half of Helios was burned red by the pure heat. Wherever the hot stream passed, the cracked ground melted again and quickly evaporated, forming deep fissures. At the speed of light, the heat rushed toward Garland. Garland gripped his cane tightly, and a huge array appeared. He used all his strength to prop up a temporary barrier in front of the village of dusk. But an endless stream of high temperature still leaked out from behind the barrier, burning more than half of the city red. After exhausting all his means and releasing Luger's chain, Garland still maintained the ability to protect himself and even kept the means to counterattack. But the moment he made a response, a sharp blade appeared in front of his chest. The curse from the dead had finally arrived. Hades, Garland was stunned on the spot. After a long time, he coughed and spat out boiling blood. Behind him, a fleeting afterimage slowly appeared. He raised his head. A face that was so familiar to him was revealed. This was the last counterattack he made against the unreachable Grand Master as the former chief of Helios, the jester of the abyss blessed by the Pied Piper. With his own death as the price, he offered everything to the abyss as a sacrifice. Just like that, Kieran broke through Garland's defense and delivered the final gift to him when Garland was most distracted. Now, the packaging of the gift box was torn open. Hades walked out of it again. It was intact. However, it was completely different from the past. Behind him, countless phantoms appeared, including the former chief, all the alchemists who had died on Helios, and naturally himself. In an instant, Garland understood. You've actually transformed yourself into a pseudo-soul. Yes, artificially made defective alchemists transformed him into an artificial soul, and finally resurrected him in the form of an artificial human. Isn't it appropriate? The copy named Hades raised his head and smiled. After many years, he finally saw this old friend who had been with him for many years and solemnly greeted him. "Long time no see," he said. "My brother." Chapter 895. Nothing could stop an alchemist's thirst for knowledge. Just like how human ambition could never be contained, it was no different from hope, ideals, and thirst. Regardless of whether it was called a good name or an evil name, there was no difference in their nature. If the living had original sin, then this sin would always accompany their life from the moment they opened their eyes. For the alchemists of Helios, the existence of this sin was even more important. A soul that had lost its thirst for knowledge had no value in existence, and there was no point in keeping the results that were satisfied with the current situation. What kind of alchemist was an alchemist that no longer desired more? For the sake of this thirst for knowledge that extended towards hell, they had paid many sacrifices, including their own souls and lives. Still, they did not know what was good for them, and were unwilling to stop. In order to grasp the power of the gods, they needed to obtain a corresponding talent. If they did not have the talent, then they would rely on those who did. If they could not obtain the talent, then they would create the talent themselves. This was the origin of everything that was destined to happen now. In order to create an alchemist that could take that step, they had paid a long time and an endless price. They had collected all the technology that could be used, and they had broken through all the problems that stood in their way. It was not only the study of origin substances, souls, and creation in alchemy, even the study of genetics, biology, eugenics, and so on. All the technology that could be used had to be obtained. All the forces that could be of help had to be put into the cauldron. They had to endure the tempering, explore the unknown, and overcome difficulties. In the end, they had come up with the existence of a man-made grandmaster. When everyone was on the verge of despair, it had arrived like salvation. All the costs had been worth it. All the sacrifices were about to be repaid. But before that, before the success of the artificial grandmaster, there were more experimental products, more failed products, more flawed products, and more useless trash that could not be used, born from the cauldron of life. Just like the ashes that were buried in the graveyard without anyone noticing. Long before Publius was born, countless of his blood relatives had withered away in the darkness. It was because of this that Hades had come to this world. He had been born even earlier than Publius. Unfortunately, after the examination, although Hades had amazing talent, he still couldn't touch the realm of a great grandmaster. A normal person's ability might still have the possibility of improvement, but unfortunately, before he was born, Hades's upper limit was already set. He could only seal it up, and when it was tested in the future, he would exist as a defective product in the control group. From the day he could understand words, he knew the truth of his birth. However, Hades had never felt any resentment towards this. Not everyone was born with a complete body. In the present realm, there were also babies who were born without limbs or were blind and deaf, weren't there? It was just a slight misfortune. There were some obstacles, but they could still be overcome. He accepted his fate, his future, and everything else, even if they were never perfect, and, like him, were born incomplete. Now, he was finally standing in front of a martial grandmaster. He had become his enemy. Amazing Hades! Garland opened his mouth and spat out hot blood. I regarded him as an opponent, but I neglected you. The gap in talent has long made up for all this. It's only natural. Hades calmly pulled out his dagger. You shouldn't care about a small character like me, a clown like a jester. Garland staggered and fell to the ground, but before he hit the ground, Hades raised his hand, and an invisible force pulled him, causing him to float in the air. Behind Hades, the vague simulated souls quickly shrank and turned into chains, pulling Garland's limbs and shackling him by force. Then, the seal formed by the souls of the alchemists began to spread. A dark array emerged from Garland's body and multiplied, sealing the inside and outside like a cage. This was a living seal. Unlike those rigid shackles, only the alchemist's own will could completely cut off Garland's connection with the outside world at all times. They didn't even allow him to die. As the wounds closed, only drops of residual blood fell to the ground. Don't worry, brother, I won't kill you, Hades said coldly. As long as I keep you here, it's enough. Although it was somewhat soft-hearted. In fact, this was the safest and most rational way to do things. If the enemy was a martial grandmaster, he couldn't underestimate him at any time. Now that Publius's success was imminent, who knew what kind of changes would occur once he killed Garland? How much damage would a martial grandmaster cause if he sacrificed his life? As long as he was imprisoned, it would be fine. Sealed and imprisoned, completely powerless, to ensure that he was cut off from all contact with the outside world and become a mere spectator, a powerless bystander. Garland turned his head with difficulty, looked at the array around him, and couldn't help but shake his head. Who did you learn this from? Isn't it very similar to what you did to Publius back then? Hades told him, "This inspiration was given to me by you. It's much easier to deal with a martial grandmaster alive than dead. I just hope that he can think it through, that's all. Think clearly about who he really is and what he really wants to do." Garland laughed hoarsely. "I didn't expect that the prison on the moon wouldn't be able to contain him. When I saw him for the last time, I already knew that he had escaped using a method that I never thought of. This is his fate, isn't it?" "This isn't his fate, Hades. Shouldn't you be clear about it?" Garland retorted coldly. "His obsession is stronger than I thought, but where did your obsession come from? In order to create a god, you didn't hesitate to create hell. When did you fall to such a level?" Hades thought for a moment and shrugged. "People change, don't they?" "Yes, but did you really change for yourself?" Garland raised his eyes and stared at his face, his former friend and blood relative. "The Hades in my memory should be a person who, after understanding his own imperfections, wants others to be happy. When did you become like this, Hades? After understanding the limitations of your own abilities? Or after listening to the bewitchment of the piper? After becoming the chief alchemist? After inheriting the crazy knowledge and pollution of those alchemists? Is everything you've done really based on your original intentions?" Garland asked hoarsely. "Do you still remember your original appearance, Hades?" In the long silence, Hades didn't speak. He just quietly stared at the sun in the distance that was gradually descending toward the black tower. After a long time, he laughed silently. It was as if he had heard a ridiculous joke. "It's just a change, is it strange?" He turned his head and asked doubtfully, "What's the difference between being changed by the piper and being changed by other people? When you said that, didn't you realize that you were also changed by the world of the Astronomical Association? Learned by the Stone Cauldron, by your students, by your friends, by everything you encountered, people will change. It's nothing more than changing for the better or for the worse. The funny thing is that you regard change as a disaster. In this world, isn't the person who wants to maintain himself the most, hates change the most, and hopes that he will never change the most, right in front of you?" He raised his hand and pointed at the black tower in the distance. It was the Grand Master Publius, who laughed loudly and opened his arms, wanting to embrace the sun in the void. "Look, if you want to be immortal and not be destroyed by this world, the price is to destroy this world." Hades said, "This principle is so simple, it's just that you don't want to understand it." Garland didn't speak, or rather, he didn't want to say anything. For a madman, any kind of advice was useless. "By the way, there's one more thing that you might be wrong about." Hades told him, seriously, "I chose my own depravity not because of anything else. It wasn't because the piper bewitched me. It was because I took the initiative to find the piper." "Why?" Garland's pupils froze for a moment. He raised his head in disbelief. He saw Hades' disdainful gaze. "Not everyone can be like you and choose to be free without any responsibility." The culprit who destroyed Helios with his own hands raised his head and looked down at the Savior who was trying to save everything. "Isn't all of this caused by you? Didn't I ask you at that time? But you don't care what will happen to everything after you leave, do you? You don't care about everyone's sacrifice and expectations of you. You only think about yourself. But what can I do? I just want to replace you and complete my mission. Is it wrong to want to be repaid for all the sacrifices you've made?" Garland didn't look at him again, He only felt a sense of absurdity and mockery, but he couldn't laugh at all. He wanted to scold him, but he didn't even have the strength to do so. Compared to me, you are the one who is more strange. Hades asked coldly, since you have already left, why did you come back? Yes, why did he come back? Back to the cage that he had escaped from, the place that he regarded as hell. Garland raised his head and stared at the dark universe. After a long time, he sighed self-deprecatingly, probably because I regret it. Regret. But it was too late for regret. Regret. Escape from his own fate. Regret. Push his only friend and his only remaining blood relative to such an ending. Even though they were riding at full speed on the road to destruction, they were willing to endure it. Perhaps there was some hatred. He hated Helios, hated those gods who left behind secrets, and also hated those lunatics who refused to realize their mistakes. What he hated most was himself, who had created all of this for the sake of freedom. When he wanted to take back his original fate and guide everything back on the right track, he was already Garland. He was Grandmaster Garland, no longer Publius, and no longer had anything to do with Helios. When he finally made up his mind, it was too late. Perhaps this was the price he had to pay. Look on the bright side. At least you are back home, aren't you? Hades considerately comforted him. After so many years of wandering, you have finally returned to where you should go. Home. Garland coughed and shook his head. There is only ambition, arrogance, and sin here. Hades, that kind of thing never existed. No, it exists. It has always been here. Hades raised his head and looked at the broken Helios, looking at the rolling steel ground, as well as the exposed thick pipes, ancient equipment, huge facilities, countless workshops, and even more secrets. Zhang Xian felt a chill run down his spine. Look, this is our home, he said. Unfortunately, it is not a warm place, and there is no such extravagant thing as love. At best, it is just an assembly line. We are tools, parts, gears that are destined to be all fates since we were born. We did everything we could to complete our mission, and in the end, we were damaged and abandoned. Now it is finally time to produce. Hades turned around and smiled. Just like many years ago, he greeted him gently. Welcome home, brother. Chapter 896. The chaotic battle soon came to an end amidst the chaos. The blood-stained twilight village was filled with cracks. Thick black smoke rose from the destroyed facilities. The melted production equipment turned into red-hot molten iron that flowed freely. It was even closer to the original appearance of hell. Huaishur heard a cracking sound coming from the surging sea of hatred. The transmission of origin form that he maintained with all his strength was interrupted for a moment. Then he lost his target. He froze in place. Only the mournful cries of the Kuanping could be heard. In the sky, a large group of leaders who were swept by the sun's high-temperature rays let out their final song. They withered from the sea of hatred and fell, along with their master. A rain of blood poured down. In the cracks of the earth, Ing Fangzhou opened his eyes with difficulty and saw the scythe that had pierced through his chest. There was still the last enemy, Gala, the solidifier, after a fierce and cruel battle. All his wings were broken, and he lost an arm and most of his internal organs. Even after suffering such heavy injuries, the follower of the withered king still did not die. How many times has it been, Ing Fangzhou? The 5th time or the 6th time? Gala laughed hoarsely. He raised his foot and stepped on Ing Fangzhou's chest. He stepped on the scythe and did not allow Ing Fangzhou to break free. His broken eye was filled with ferocity and joy. The victory and glory that he had not obtained from the several battles that his enemy had been alive had come to him after his enemy's death. Yun Zhongjuan, raised his broken hand again, but he could no longer touch the enemy that was close at hand. This time I've won. Is that so? The corners of Ing Fangzhou's mouth curled up with difficulty. He looked at Gala as if he was looking at a fool. His lips slowly opened and closed, and he said, "But I haven't lost yet." When Gala was about to say something, his expression suddenly changed. There was a mournful howl burst forth. It fell from the sky. In the rain of blood, there was a brilliant flash of lightning falling from the dissipating clouds. It followed the call of its master and burst forth with the final sound of thunder. The outline of the lost water spear emerged from the lightning. In an instant, it pierced through Gala's head and tore his smile. It pierced through him and his master and nailed them to the ground. The broken hand held the spear tightly. Lightning shot out. Along with a resounding, shattering sound, countless crystal fragments flowed out of Gara's blood. Asmodeus' final strength was completely defeated. This was the final blow that would determine the outcome of the battle. Gala's smile froze, and countless cracks appeared on his body. He quickly turned into broken gold that lost its luster and fell apart. The remaining blood fell on Ing Fangzhou's face, lighting up his dim eyes. What a pity. It seems that I've won this time around. It's not over yet. As the carrier collapsed, Gala struggled to speak. I will wait in hell, no matter how long it takes. Ing Fangzhou, our banquet has just begun. One day we will again. There won't be a next time. Gala. Ing Fangzhou interrupted his words. The final thunderbolt tore apart his remaining carrier. Your enemy will no longer be me. The face of the one who had solidified was stunned. Then it turned into metal dust and dissipated. It returned to the kingdom of the King of Wither and once again fell into a long slumber. Ing Fangzhou coldly retracted his gaze and no longer looked until he heard footsteps not far away and stopped beside him. It was Huaishir. He had dawdled for too long. When did you come? Ing Fangzhou asked. Huaishir thought for a moment and said seriously, just now. Another lie. Ing Fangzhou sneered disdainfully and did not give him any face. Huaishir wasn't embarrassed at all. She just smiled and sat down beside him. At least I got to witness a hearty battle and record Senior's heroic bearing, right? Meaningless flattery and flattery. Were the younger generation of the current generation really reliable? Ing Fangzhou sighed. Did you see what I taught you clearly? Huaishir scratched his head and shrugged helplessly. To be honest, I forgot as I watched. I've almost forgotten everything. Why don't we do it again? Next time. Why don't you try again? Ing Fangzhou seemed to sneer and did not answer him. Although he was a little slippery, he was smart. At least he did not have to worry that he would be like him and not turn back. Perhaps he did not have to worry too much, but it was still too outrageous. This was what it meant by getting worse with each generation, right? He sighed silently, not knowing whether to be angry or laugh. In this silence, Ing Fangzhou quietly looked at the sky, the darkness of the universe that looked like hell, for a long, long time. Kid, is the Republic still there? Of course. The young man nodded, as if he did not understand why the senior would ask such a question. He was a little confused. It's been so many years. Everyone has spread their branches and leaves in the present realm, flourishing and thriving. It's great. Why are you asking this? Again, a lie to deceive a child? But even though he knew it was a lie, Ing Fangzhou could not help but feel a sense of relief from the bottom of his heart. It was as if dawn had finally arrived after a long wait. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Don't admit defeat. Huaishir, he whispered softly. He murmured softly as he gripped the hand of his successor tightly. Don't be like me, but there's nothing I can do if I don't admit defeat. Huaisher was helpless. He turned around and looked at the huge sun in the distance. The enemy is something of that level. Senior, no matter how you think about it, you can't beat it, right? Then think of a way yourself. Be more mature, and don't always rely on others to solve it. Are you a kindergarten child? If you need guidance on everything? Ing Fangzhou wanted to scold him, but he could not help but want to laugh. Thinking about it carefully, such words. I don't think I've said it to them even once. But after saying it, I feel very relaxed. Isn't it good to be irresponsible occasionally? So, this time, I'll leave it to you guys to do whatever you want. Do your best. Huaisher, he said. He said, this is already your job. All right, then I'll work harder. Huaisher nodded, held his weak hand tightly, and promised seriously, can you rest assured now? Ing Fangzhou did not answer. It was as if he did not hear it. He just quietly looked at the stars in the universe, bathed in the light of thousands of years ago, as if he was being embraced by those ancient memories. Thus, he once again saw those young and tender faces, those frivolous and undisciplined smiling faces, those little guys who were always pestering him, chattering, asking all kinds of questions, and unknowingly, they seemed to have grown up and surpassed him. They spread their wings, abandoned him, a stubborn old man, and went to the place called the future. He wanted to follow them, but it was too far away. He could not catch up. After walking such a long way, were they really well prepared? Would it rain? Would they feel afraid when it was dark? If one day they could not see the front, would they feel lonely like him? TSK, they all look unreliable. Ing Fangzhou smiled helplessly. It's really worrying, thus the man murmured sorrowfully. He smiled in relief and closed his eyes in happiness. He said goodbye to the world that no longer needed him. Goodbye, everyone. Just like that, the phantom of Yun Zhongjuan dissipated in the void and was never seen again. Only Huaisher's palm was still hanging in the air. He stared blankly in the direction of the old man's departure. He subconsciously reached out and wanted to catch him, but he could not find any trace of him. Only the heavy baton was put in his hand. The brilliance of dead water reappeared on the steel. This time there was no restless thunder, nor was there the violence of the past. Only the quiet and distant sound of the tide came to his ears. It was so distant, his final grudge disappeared without a trace. The rolling Yangtze River flowed eastward, and the waves washed away the heroes. Times would change, heroes would pass away, and mountains and rivers would change. But even if all the old things were abandoned, the passing water of this legacy would not be exhausted. So, the future was promising. But the future is too heavy, isn't it? Huaisher stared at the broken spear of dead water in his hand and could not help but sigh. Senior, you trust me so much. What if I lose face? That's not good. No one answered. Only the friendly giant dog next to him tilted its head and looked at him. It yawned and licked its sharp claws. Sparks burst out. He did not know why this guy was still dawdling. It was a little impatient, a little sad, and a little angry, so it wanted to fight. As long as it could be solved by fighting, it would not be a problem for it. If it could not be solved, it would fight 2 more times. If it still could not beat it, it would find a place to have a meal and continue fighting. Simple and straightforward thinking was always so refreshing and enlightening. However, when Huaisher looked around, he found that in the vast twilight village, he seemed to be the only one who dared to walk out at this moment. There was also a dog, and half of the ghost skull floating in the water tank. It was still blabbering. He really did not know when it would get better. Huaisher missed it a little. So, in the end, only a few of us are left. Huaisher looked at the tower of Pubris in the distance and felt bald again. It's really difficult, but we still have to do it, right? He carefully put the water tank containing the skull back on the eternal frost furnace and kept it in the safest place in Helios. He closed the door for it with force. Then, sorry for the long wait, Huaisher turned around and looked outside the twilight village. Behind the broken wall, there was a figure leaning on the ruins. Hercules. You're welcome, his opponent replied calmly. That opponent replied calmly. Stalling for time is actually more advantageous to me. It was completely different from how it used to be. With the blessing of the miracle engravings, it had regained its former state of victory. At this moment, the ancient hero was wearing solemn armor with a robe inside. He carried a heavy shield and a longbow on his back, a short sword and a long sword at his waist, and a golden fur cloak around his shoulders. The short sword given by Hermes, the longbow given by Apollo, the robe given by Athena, the armor forged by Hephaestus, and even the arrows soaked in Hydra's blood, the belt of the Amazon queen, the bronze jar with the head of Medusa, and the shield made of plaster, ivory, and gold and silver by the Vulcan, not to mention their master. He had completed 12 great feats and stood at the top of the world as a demigod. He was the strongest warrior and the strongest hero in Greece. He was a terrifying opponent with no shortcomings and no flaws. You've become stronger. Huaisher sighed. You're so strong that I don't know where to start. We're the same, aren't we? Hercules held the hilt of his sword and looked at the opponent in front of him. If I had met an enemy like you 1,000 years ago, I would have been so excited that I would have gone crazy and wanted to kill you. It's a pity that I couldn't meet you in the past. He paused for a moment, restraining his fighting spirit, and told him, there won't be any helpers coming to support you, young warrior. He has already made arrangements for all the opponents, and they can't even take care of themselves now. Huaisher smiled. And I have to face the strongest hero of Greece, right? Not necessarily. Hercules shook his head. If you want to leave here, you still have time. Huaisher, a young man like you shouldn't be killed by a phantom from the past like me. You still have a future. He said solemnly, a future that belongs to you. It's a pity, Hercules. The future you're talking about is not the same as what my predecessor expected. Huaisher looked down at the dead water in his hand and told him seriously, and compared to the former, I prefer the latter. Really, have you thought it through? There was admiration in Hercules' eyes. Won't you have any regrets? After all, I've already promised someone. I can't lose. Huaisher laughed. Although it's difficult to win, if it's just don't give up, at least I can try, right? That's great. It reminds me of when I was on Argo, high-spirited. Hercules whispered. Hercules murmured softly. He took off his shield, pulled out the dagger at his waist, and solemnly declared, Then come, young warrior. Your enemy is the beloved of the gods, the hero who has made great achievements. I am the son of Zeus, the queen of heaven, the son of Hera, the son of God. He smiled, full of ecstasy and murderous intent, and roared excitedly. My name is Hercules, celestial genealogy, great arbiter of life. Why, sure. The young warrior picked up dead water. Please enlighten me. As the phantom of a bull, a white horse, and a giant deer appeared behind him, the mighty crows let out a high-pitched caw. Just like that, great arbiter of life, who had returned to his prime, or even a level higher, challenged the demigod who once had an unparalleled achievement. Thunder burst out again. Supreme and Holy Oath, despite having different names, were essentially the same. The talents that were above mortals collided at this moment. After stepping into a new realm, used step in Greek's hurricane steps crossed a long distance. The collision between metal and metal set off a high-pitched caw again. Sparks burst out. This battle, which had been predestined since the first time they met, had begun once again. Chapter 897, The Collision of Dead Water, and the dagger only lasted for a moment. There was not even a loud noise. There was only the sound of a bubble bursting. After realizing that the surprise attack did not work, the two sides no longer poured more power into the dagger and entered a stalemate. After seeing Hercules' speed again, they had a better understanding of how tricky Hercules was. Whether it was the Supreme Tier Symphony, which could release power from any direction of the body without any blind spots, or the nameless Sacred Oath, which could compress multiple powerful attacks into a short moment, they were all unpredictable skills. If Hercules did not change his moves and could not react in time, Hercules would seize the opportunity and break his defense in an instant. Huaishur retreated and chose to defend himself. Hercules' figure had disappeared from where he stood. There was only the sound of the wind behind him, but Hercules' movements were even faster than the wind. The dagger, which had been buffed by Hercules, became swifter and swifter, launching an attack from the back without any gap. Huaishur seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. He raised the sword of virtue and blocked the killing blow with the heavy blade. But before he could fight back, Hercules' figure flashed in front of him with his strange footwork. The moment Hercules' hands were unable to defend himself, the dagger aimed at his face and slashed down. Huaishur's eyes widened as he looked at the approaching dagger. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and gritted his teeth. The light of gold and iron emerged between his teeth, and the flame of the axe of wrath burned fiercely. It collided head-on with the dagger without flinching, and the loudest sound of steel since the beginning of the battle burst out. Hercules returned without success. Huaishur's vision turned black, and he felt that his teeth were about to fall out. But the premonition of death still lingered in his heart. He raised his hand subconsciously and slashed the sword of virtue to the right. It was as if he had slashed a speeding truck. The tremendous force burst out again. In an instant, he could not hold the dagger tightly, and the dagger slipped out of his hand. However, Hercules did not stop there. He was even accelerating. There was not even a moment's gap. Hercules' phantom appeared behind Huaishur again, but this time he appeared in front of Huaishur at the same time. In the air, the real short sword in his hand was aimed at Huaishur's back and head, and he swung it down. This was the terrifying move that instantly beheaded all of the Hydra's heads, the true form of the Holy Oath. In a hurry, Huaishur only had time to reverse dead water and turn around with all his might to block the sword that was stabbing towards his back. However, the sword that was slashing towards his neck was already very close. If you walk by the sea all the time for your car to overturn is finally here. He was going to be beheaded. Huaishur opened his mouth helplessly as the murderous intent approached him inch by inch. His loosened gums were unable to bite down on any weapon to resist this attack. But it didn't matter. At the very least, he could reveal a brilliant smile to his opponent and show them how happy he was right now. Because in front of Huaishur, behind Hercules, the dog also laughed. This was Hercules' real counterattack. In his heyday, the true legendary hero, Hercules possessed terrifying power. Even if Huaishur had not experienced it, he was already infinitely vigilant and fearful of it in his heart. After the user's state improved, the limit of the Holy Oath that could complete 3 strikes in an instant would naturally increase. 4 strikes, 5 strikes, 6 strikes. Without experiencing it personally, who would know how exaggerated Hercules could reach? One must know that the legendary Hydra had 9 heads. He had to create an opportunity to suppress this move. He had to be on guard against this move. At the same time, he had to let his opponent fall into his trap. In this way, using himself as bait, when Hercules was the closest to success, Huaishur's counterattack finally came. Now, it was in midair below Hercules. Bichimos, the incarnation of pain, opened his mouth. Flames that were above the temperature of the furnace lit up from his throat, and a stream of molten steel gushed out. Ignoring that Weisher was also within the attack range, the molten steel vapor turned into a sweeping stream of molten steel at a terrifyingly high temperature, rapidly expanding and spreading, completely covering the entire area. For Weisher, it was like a cool breeze, using the same source to transform the steam of steel into source, and at the same time using the casting furnace to reduce the high temperature in it. It was like supplementing mana in disguise. But for Hercules, it was no different from a white phosphorus incendiary bomb dropped by a fighter jet, or even worse. After Weischer's modification, the composition of the metal vapor was completely different. Its burning temperature was above that of white phosphorus, and its adhesion was far better than that of any superglue. In particular, the source substance attached to it had undergone a qualitative change and combined with the power of the axe of wrath. As long as Hercules was hit by this spray, he would have to maintain a state of burning combat power for the rest of the battle. But Hercules' ability to adapt was still more exaggerated than Weischer had imagined. Even with a full blow, Hercules could still change his move in an instant. Then, with a twist of his waist, his falling momentum suddenly turned into a roll. He nimbly brushed past the edge of the stream of molten flame. Before he landed, the sound of metal Hercules' crashing burst out of nowhere, and a crack appeared on his helmet. Then, he waved the short sword in his hand again, and again, as if he was fighting with an invisible weapon. He almost fell to the ground. Bichimos had indeed felt an invisible hammer ruthlessly smashing against his skull. Along with his line of sight, the hammer kept emerging from the void and smashing down, causing him to fully experience the severity of the pain. But before he could stand firm, a blazing flame lit up behind him. The burning bull, draped in heavy armor, was already there, ready. It lowered its head, spewing flames from its mouth and nose, roaring and galloping. You step. The merciless chop of the axe, wrapped in its own terrifying mass, formed a terrifying impact that could penetrate steel and sent Hercules, who had landed firmly on the ground, flying backward. In midair, Hercules opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood-colored saliva. He suddenly turned over and landed on the ground. Then, as if a rainstorm had descended, hundreds of puncture marks appeared on the ground around him, and countless flowers and plants grew out of them. The short sword collided with the sharp horns of the white deer for a moment, and the burning bull had already come to Hercules' side. When Weischer waved his hand, a mighty tide of crows emerged from the shadows and hovered in the air, spying on Hercules' every flaw and weakness with the sharp blades of resentment. Hercules roared. The armor from the Vulcan shone brightly, shaking off the armors around him and finally putting some distance between them. "Excuse me." On the spot, Weischer finally caught his breath and smiled at Hercules. "As a great arbiter, it is reasonable for you to bring your own army with you, isn't it?" If Hercules was an ordinary opponent, he would have been furious by now. He would have gone mad, or become timid, or become gloomy and silent. But when Hercules raised his head, he showed a surprised smile. "Very reasonable. Why, sure. Very good." He nodded, praising the opponent in front of him from the bottom of his heart. "This power is really amazing. It is indeed a powerful avatar. Even if I had known about it, only by experiencing it myself can I feel how terrifying it is." Weischer was slightly stunned. Then he saw Hercules' expression became more and more cheerful. "I was worried that I would have an unfair advantage." As he spoke, a roar burst out in the void, as if thousands of horses were galloping. Sacred light descended from the sky. It turned into countless huge and ferocious war horses. Hercules did not know what bloodline they had inherited, but their muscles were unbelievably strong, and a faint black mist rose from their bodies like flames. Their teeth were stained with blood and were as sharp as knives. Countless hordes of hell descended upon this place with Hercules' will. Huaishur felt a chill run down her spine. Mark of miracles, horseman of the Queen of Heaven. That was one of Hercules' 12 great deeds. He had subdued the horsemen of cannibal horses that the tyrannical king had cultivated with the power of a country, and presented this generous gift to the Queen of Heaven, Hera. After the gift and blessing from Hera, the hordes of hell that had been reborn had become out-and-out war machines. Even without a rider, they could run rampant on the battlefield with their sharp teeth, hard iron hooves, and terrifying speed. But it was not over yet. Hercules raised his hand and knocked on the gong-like relic in his hand. A high-pitched and sharp hiss burst out, making Huaishur dizzy. Immediately after that, the sound of countless wings flapping could be heard from the sky. An overwhelming shadow appeared from the other side of the sky. A gigantic strange bird with a strange wing membrane that looked like a pterodactyl responded to the call and flew straight towards the surging crow tide. Finally, he took off the cloak on his body. The bright, golden fur cloak fell to the ground and rolled on its own. It quickly expanded and turned into a golden lion more than 10 meters tall, with sharp claws and teeth and ferocious edges. He issued a challenge to Bichimos, who was grinning sinisterly. It was as if a scene from a myth had reappeared. Diomedes' horsemen of cannibal horses, the strange bird subdued by the gong of Athena, the giant lion of Nemea. Then there was the red, blood-stained female deer cloaked in cold moonlight, the bull trick from the god of the sea, hordes of hordes that were blessed by the gods, or simply miraculous incarnations appeared one after another, fighting with Huaishur's hordes. That tragic and spectacular scene caused Huaishur to suck in a breath of cold air. He could not even breathe in hot air. He suddenly felt a little scared. "Don't tell me you're going to whistle again and summon Hydra?" Hercules shrugged helplessly. "I did think so, but that child seemed to be afraid of me and was always unwilling to help. What about Cerberus?" "That's the pet of Hades." "Huaishur," Hercules replied seriously. "How can it listen to my orders?" Even if there was no Cerberus, this was still 2F asterisk king. Ridiculous. Was this the greatest hero of Greece? Huaishur's scalp began to tingle. For the first time, he found that he could not win against the enemy. He felt that his worldview had been impacted. Who was the great master of fate between the two of them? Chapter 898. If that's the case, we're evenly matched, right? Hercules smiled proudly, raised his hand, and blew a high-pitched whistle. The neighing of a war horse sounded again in the void. Stepping on the cold wind and waves, the handsome war horse was green all over, like the sea. It was the divine horse Arion created by Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Demeter, the goddess of the four seasons. Just like that, it obediently lowered its head and allowed Hercules to ride on its body. It was full of fighting spirit. Huaishur was facing a great enemy. He felt an unprecedented crisis and pressure since becoming a sublimator. This was the first time he was defeated by someone in terms of fashion value. This wouldn't do. Huaishur also pulled out the sword of virtue, slashed in the air, and summoned the white horse from the paradise. Tit for tat. Did you see that? I have that too. Only the white horse glanced at him unhappily. Finally, it looked at the god's creation opposite it and spat on the ground in a very human-like manner. Since following Huaishur, it seemed to have completely forgotten its original dignity and etiquette. Its weight and personality began to swell, becoming more and more outrageous. It could only be said that the creature was like its master. After following Huaishur, even the prince's white horse quickly turned into a ruffian, and its demeanor began to droop. When it and its master looked at each other, they became exceptionally disgusted with each other. The white horse was confused. "What's wrong with you? Why did you provoke this kind of thing that you can't beat?" Huaishur was even more confused. "What's wrong with you? Why did you come with a horse? How can a group of horses solve the problem at this time? I'm asking you to go to Xianlai Buddha to get reinforcements." The white horse glared at him with even more grief and indignation. "There's no signal. I can't contact him. You think I don't want to? Why don't you take a look at where you are? We're almost out of the solar system, let alone 6G. Do you have Wi-Fi?" The man and the horse looked at each other speechlessly, for words appeared in their minds. "It's over." On the divine horse Arion, Hercules, who was calm and composed, raised his head and asked, "Now, are you ready?" "No. Wait a little longer. I'll definitely do it next time. Okay?" Huaishur sighed and looked back. She thought for a moment, then asked seriously, "What's the matter?" "To be frank, Brother Hai, you and I hit it off at first sight. It can be said that we are close friends. But there's something I don't quite understand. Can you explain it to me?" Hercules nodded calmly, but his eyes were fixed on Huaishur. Just like a hawk before it started its hunt, he did not relax in the slightest. Why would such a great hero, work for Publius? Huaishur spread out his hands and asked curiously, "You see, I don't think you would stoop to being a puppet. If you want to show your ambition, why don't you abandon the dark and join our astronomy association? The treatment is great, Marnie, protecting the world, protecting peace. How is it not better than being an alchemist's lackey?" "Sounds good, but I won't consider it." Hercules shook his head and calmly rejected it. "I'm not following Publius, but the will of the gods. Since the gods have allowed me to come here, I must have a mission." "The gods?" Huaishur was puzzled. "Weren't you one of the gods?" Hercules smiled. "Isn't that why I can't like the current generation? Is it the side of the god that doesn't like it, or is it the side of the human that can't accept it?" Huaishur stared at his face and asked again, "Or do you not want to continue, Hercules? Isn't it the same?" Hercules laughed. "Huaishur, I know what you're thinking, but it's not necessary. My time, my adventure, and my war ended 1,000 years ago. Since fate has allowed you and me to meet in this solemn divine realm, we just need to express our gratitude as a reward for a lifetime of hard work. Don't worry about anything else." Just like that, he pulled the reins and no longer hid his fighting spirit. "In this dreamlike short rebirth, please fight with me. Then there's no other way." Huaishur shrugged, regretfully. "But at least I finally heard the truth." At that moment, his eyes were illuminated by the brilliance of the blade. There was a loud roar, because there was a roaring wind and raging waves. The roar of the sea burst out from under the iron hooves of the horse blessed by the god of the sea. There was a freezing cold wind blowing in his face. Then there was the burning blade that gathered infinite heat. In a flash, half of Huaishur's body was enveloped in flames and quickly extinguished. His right hand, which was holding the sword, had almost lost all feeling. There was a crack in the metal between his thumb and index finger, and it was twitching involuntarily. On the other side of the battlefield, Hercules laughed, turned the reins, and looked back. Arion whinnied and galloped toward him again. A premonition of death emerged. Huaishur stared with his eyes wide open. Originally, he thought that although Hercules had become stronger after riding a mystical horse, he could no longer use his unpredictable steps to perform the sacred oath of killing Hydra. He might be able to deal with it, but now he realized that Hercules, who had given up that strange skill, had become even more troublesome and difficult to deal with. After putting away the dagger, Hercules finally unsheathed the long sword that Huaishur had never seen before. Marfadivas, burning with eternal flames and struggle, the peerless sword forged by the god of fire for the legendary hero. Its might and power existed together with the war, and its sharpness existed together with the legend. Countless divine weapons were forged in later generations because of the legend it left behind, just like how many heroes looked up to the back of Hercules. It was a miracle that was engraved in history together with Hercules, the legendary hero's proof of invincibility. "Come on, warrior!" Hercules laughed heroically, stirring up the monstrous waves, spurring the war horse and the torrent, slashing down the blade of the sword and colliding with the burning axe. Huaishur's vision turned black, and he felt a violent shock in his soul. A crack appeared on the axe of wrath. Was this the second supreme, sacred oath, devastation? No, it should be the third, because he had already experienced the second one. This kind of panic and heavy premonition that kept emerging in his heart, and even the screams and roars of the premonition of death from the all-around suppression of his opponent. Even his soul began to panic. He was suppressed by such a heroic posture. From the bottom of his heart, he feared his opponent and felt that he could not win sacred oath, divine destruction. How despicable, Hercules! Huaishur sighed, dodging the slash of the Vulcan's sword, only to see a crack extending from where he was to the distance. "Hey, what kind of man is a spiritual attack?" "Ha ha, sorry, I can't say that I'm a noble person, and the battlefield is not a place to talk about morality. Since the war has already started, as long as I can win, I will use any dishonorable means." Arion neighed and stood up. Hercules smiled without shame and shouted, come on, warrior of the new generation, let us fight fair and square, by fair means or foul." Huaishur could not help but laugh. "What should I say now?" He thought for a moment, and said seriously, "If that's the case, then I don't have to pretend to be a gentleman." At that moment, the door of the ultimate opened behind him. Eternal darkness and countless nightmares spewed out along with despair, pain, resentment, anger, and sorrow. When the shadow of the burning banner appeared, everything was shrouded in the domain of Great Seeming. The formless hell forged by the furnace had descended. The sonorous cries of supreme symphonic mastery burst forth from here. The charging of the divine horse Arion paused for a moment. The torrent was covered by darkness, and the support of the wind of four seasons disappeared without a trace. It was temporarily suppressed. On the other hand, Huaishur, who was on the white horse, galloped over. Once again, they passed by each other. Sparks flew. Hercules sheathed his sword and took off the longbow on his back. The arrows that were soaked in Hydra's poisonous blood were blocked by Huaishur's deadwater pistol. The deadly poison fell into the shadows and disappeared without a trace, leaving only clusters of pure white iris flowers blooming. In the midst of the deadly poison, the legendary hero's expression did not change. His smile was still bright and cheerful, galloping in the darkness of despair. The sword of flame in his hand shining brightly. This insignificant resentment could not stop his pace, and the anger from the enemy would only make him stronger. The arrival of adversity only served to further boost his fighting spirit. This was the fourth supreme that was condensed from absolute confidence and absolute bravery after countless battles. Holy oath, undefeatable. The Vulcan's sword crashed down, and once again it defeated the projection of the spear in Huaishur's hand. This time, the divine horse actually stopped in place without any warning, turned back, and charged towards Huaishur again, without any buffering or charging, as if it was playing with the entire space under its feet. The white horse widened its eyes and charged forward, not to be outdone. Ignoring the torrent that cut its body and the frost that spread on its wounds, the white horse opened its mouth and bit at Arion. The incarnation of the sword of virtue whinnied, asking the guy on its back to give it more strength. "Show me the backbone of a prince of paradise, you bastard!" Huaishur roared. Clenching the hammer of pain with both hands, Huaishur and the Vulcan's sword once again smashed together. The supreme symphony collected all the remaining sounds in the surroundings. The power of resonance and resonance erupted from Huaishur's hands, colliding with the infinite power from Hercules. The light in Hercules' eyes was even brighter. Riding on Arion, it once again pulled away, preparing for the next attack. But this time, Huaishur actually chased after it. Without any warning, the darkness under Arion's hooves suddenly boiled. The giant python that had been dormant for a long time shot out, entangling it. The pitch-black python opened its mouth and tore at the divine horse's flesh and blood, binding it together with Hercules. Hercules' eyes widened in shock. He did not expect this. The rope of sorrow. This was the trump card that Huaishur had been hiding in the dark for a long time. The rope of sorrow, the axe of wrath, turned around, drawing a fierce arc in the air and chopping down at Hercules' head. At this critical moment, Hercules suddenly took a deep breath and roared. A red glow appeared under his bronze skin, and he forcibly tore open a gap in the giant python's shackles. Such restraint was indeed terrifying, but it was not Laocoon here. The Vulcan's sword blocked the axe of wrath. At that moment, he heard Huaishur shouting with all his might, "Beelzebub!" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.